Hi guys, and welcome to History for Calm Nights. Tonight we step softly into the dim blue hush before dawn in 19th century America, where you wake not to an alarm clock, but to the steady breathing of your family and the faint crackle of dying embers in the hearth. The air feels cool against your cheeks. The cabin smells of wood smoke, wool blankets, and earth packed hard beneath worn boots. Outside, the sky is only beginning to pale, and somewhere in the distance a rooster clears his throat like a grumpy old man preparing to announce the day. You stretch beneath layers of quilts that feel heavier than they look, and here is your gentle reality check. You probably would not survive this without a serious upgrade in resilience and a solid appreciation for drafty architecture. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as you settle in, tell me in the comments where you are listening from and what your local time is right now. I love imagining this quiet circle of night owls and early birds scattered across the globe. Now dim the lights. You lie still for a moment longer listening. There is no hum of electricity, no distant traffic. Just the faint rustle of straw in the mattress, tick the slow rhythm of your partner's breathing beside you, and the occasional shift of a child on the trundle bed near the hearth. In many ordinary households across the expanding United States, this is how the day begins. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that most families in rural America lived in homes with one or two rooms well into the mid-19th century. Space is a luxury measured not in square footage but in elbow room. You push yourself upright, the bed creaks rope beneath the mattress, tightening and complaining in a language of fibre and wood. The mattress itself is stuffed with straw or corn husks, replaced seasonally if you're fortunate. It rustles as you move, a dry whisper that reminds you of autumn fields. Comfort is relative. After a full day of physical labour, even this uneven surface feels like a gift. Historians still argue whether segmented sleep, sometimes called first and second sleep, remained common in America by this century, or whether it had already begun to fade. Some letters and diaries suggest people occasionally woke in the middle of the night to tend fires, pray, or simply sit in thought before returning to bed. Other researchers believe the practice diminished as industrial rhythms slowly crept into daily life. As you sit there in the half-light, you imagine that quiet pause between sleeps. It does not feel inconvenient. It feels contemplative. You swing your legs over the side of the bed and your bare feet meet the cold floor. The chill runs up your spine. There are no slippers waiting neatly by a bedside table. You grope for your boots, feeling the stiff leather still slightly damp from yesterday's dew. Around you the room carries the marks of multi-purpose living. The same table where you knead bread will later hold tools mending, and perhaps a school primer for the children. At night it stands as silent witness to whispered conversations and the soft glow of candlelight. A curious detail from the period reveals that some families placed heated bricks or flat stones wrapped in cloth at the foot of the bed during winter. It sounds almost luxurious, yet it required forethought and precious fuel. You picture yourself tucking such a warm stone beneath your blankets, feeling heat slowly radiate toward your toes. It is a small mercy in a world without Outside the horizon brightens. You cross to the hearth and kneel, brushing aside the grey ash. Beneath it a faint orange glow persists, stubborn and alive. This quiet ember is the heart of your home. Losing it overnight would mean extra labour striking flint or borrowing fire from a neighbour. A well-documented reality of the time is that maintaining a continuous household fire was often essential for survival, especially in colder regions. You add a few small sticks, coaxing flame back into being. The fire catches with a soft sigh. The children begin to stir. A small hand rubs sleepy eyes. Another turns over hair tangled against a homespun pillowcase. There is no separate nursery glowing with pastel lamps. Everyone sleeps within earshot. Privacy is thin as the cabin walls, yet closeness is thick as the quilts. You feel the warmth of shared breath and shared dreams. In towns and cities, conditions vary. Brick row houses might offer multiple floors and narrow staircases, yet even there families often doubled up in rooms. Boarding houses take in strangers who become temporary roommates. Scholars continue to debate how these crowded conditions shaped emotional bonds. Did closeness foster intimacy and resilience, or did it create constant strain? As you watch your household wake, you sense it is probably both. You reach for a small tin cup and dip it into a bucket of water drawn yesterday from a well. The water is cool and metallic on your tongue. Washing is brisk and practical. A splash on the face, a quick comb through hair. No steaming shower, no scented soap from a pump bottle. just the scent of lye and the sharp clarity of morning air sneaking through chinks in the logs. You open the door. Dawn spills in, gently revealing a landscape that depends entirely on human effort. If you live on a farm, fields stretch outward, waiting for plough or harvest depending on the season. If you live in a frontier settlement, tree stumps still mark the ground where forest once stood. In either case, your rest last night was not indulgence. It was preparation. A well-known historical pattern shows that most rural families rose with the sun and structured their day around natural light. Artificial illumination remained limited and costly. This means bedtime often came earlier than modern schedules would tolerate. As twilight deepened, so did fatigue. You imagine how heavy your eyelids must have felt after hours of chopping wood, hauling water, sewing by dim candlelight. When you finally laid down, sleep likely claimed you quickly, unless hunger worry or a crying child intervened. There is a soft lowing from the barn. Animals demand attention before you can think of breakfast. Your stomach growls in agreement. Cornmeal mush, perhaps, or leftover bread warmed at the hearth. You glance back into the cabinet, your family gathering themselves for the day. The memory of shared warmth still lingers in your skin. It is easy to romanticize this simplicity. Candlelight quilts and the wholesome image of everyone tucked in beneath one roof. Yet you know that reality carries sharp edges. Illness spreads easily in close quarters. Winter drafts seep through cracks no matter how carefully you stuff them with rags. And sleep is often interrupted by responsibility. Still, as the sun finally clears the horizon, you carry with you the quiet intimacy of that pre-dawn hour. The world outside may be vast and unpredictable, but inside these rough walls, night has offered its brief shelter. And as you step forward into the day's labour, you already understand that when darkness returns, this same room will transform again into a shared sanctuary of straw rope and whispered breath. You spend the early hours outside, but your thoughts keep circling back to the shelter behind you. That modest structure, whether cabin, farmhouse, or narrow town dwelling, shapes nearly every detail of how you sleep and live. It is not simply a backdrop, it is the silent partner in your survival. If you imagine arriving here months or years earlier, you see the land as it first appeared. Perhaps it was wooded dense with oak and pine, or open prairie with grass that rippled like water in the wind. A broadly recognised historical reality is that many families in the 19th century built their own homes, especially in rural and frontier regions. Timber was felled by hand. Logs were dragged not by machine, but by animal strength and human determination. You picture yourself gripping an axe, the handle worn smooth by sweat. Each swing echoes through the clearing. Wood chips scatter at your boots. The air smells sharp and green. This labour is not optional. Shelter must come before comfort. The first walls might rise quickly, rough logs stacked and notched at the corners. Gaps are stuffed with mud, clay, or moss to keep out drafts. It is imperfect. It is enough. Historians still argue whether the romantic image of the sturdy log cabin overstates its prevalence. Some scholars suggest that frame houses built with milled lumber as sawmills expanded became more common earlier than popular imagination allows. Others maintain that in more remote areas the log structure remained dominant well into the century. As you run your hand along the inside wall, feeling the uneven grain beneath your fingertips, you sense how much your sleep depends on this debate. A solid wall blocks wind. A poorly fitted one invites it straight into your blankets. Inside space is measured carefully. If your home has a single large room, every decision about placement matters. The hearth claims one wall. It must, because it provides warmth, light, and a surface for cooking. The bed often stands nearby to catch residual heat during winter. During summer, you might shift bedding farther from the fire's lingering warmth. You learn quickly that architecture and seasons are in constant conversation. A curious detail from the era reveals that some early cabins lacked glass windows altogether. Instead, openings were covered with oiled paper or thin animal hide to let in light while keeping out weather. Later, small panes of glass became more available, though still expensive. Imagine trying to drift to sleep with moonlight filtered through oiled paper, soft and hazy, the outside world blurred into shadow. It is beautiful in its own way, but also fragile. You step inside again to examine the floor. In some homes, it is nothing more than packed earth smoothed and swept daily. In others, wide wooden planks stretch across simple joists. If you're fortunate enough to have boards, you notice the gaps between them. At night, you might hear the faint scuttle of a mouse below, or the wind slipping through cracks. The floor is not just something you walk on, it is a reminder that nature remains close, almost intimate. As towns grow and trade expands, you begin to see brick houses rising in certain regions. Fired clay bricks hold heat differently from logs. They store warmth from the sun and release it slowly after dusk. In colder climates, this can make nights slightly more bearable. In hotter regions, thick walls offer a measure of insulation. Researchers continue to debate how quickly these improvements spread beyond wealthier families. Was the average household truly insulated from extreme temperatures, or did meaningful comfort remain out of reach for most? You feel the answer in the chill that creeps along your arms when the fire burns low. The roof above you tells its own story. Wooden shingles, split by hand, overlap in careful rows. During heavy rain, you listen to water striking them in steady rhythm. The sound can be soothing, almost hypnotic. But when shingles warp or loosen, drips find their way inside. You may shift your bed slightly to avoid a persistent leak. Sleep becomes a negotiation with gravity and weather. There is also the matter of ceilings. In a one-room cabin, the ceiling may be open to the rafters, allowing smoke to rise before escaping through a chimney or even a simple hole in the roof. On cold nights, heat gathers high above you out of reach. Some families hang cloth or construct a loft to trap warmth lower in the room. If you climb into a loft to sleep, you find it warmer but closer to smoke. The scent of soot lingers in your hair and blankets. A widely accepted fact of the period is that chimneys were critical yet sometimes dangerous features. Poorly constructed chimneys could spark house fires, especially when creosote built up inside. You fall asleep knowing that the very element keeping you warm might also threaten everything you own. It is a quiet tension beneath the comfort of firelight. Outside, you may build additional structures as your family grows, a lean-to for storage, a separate kitchen in hotter climates to reduce indoor heat. Eventually, perhaps a second room attached to the first. Expansion is gradual, shaped by births, harvests, and occasional prosperity. Each new wall slightly alters how you rest. Children might move into their own corner. Parents might claim a bit more privacy. Or perhaps an aging grandparent is given a bed near the hearth for warmth. It's tempting to imagine that everyone desired larger homes. Yet some historians suggest that compact living reinforced family cohesion in ways modern architecture rarely does. Others counter that overcrowding contributed to stress and conflict. As you watch your household navigate the narrow paths between table bed and hearth, you feel how space can both cradle and constrain. Even the door matters. A simple wooden slab on iron hinges stands between your sleeping family and the vast outdoors. At night, you secure it with a latch or bar. The gesture feels symbolic. Inside is warmth and shared breath. Outside is darkness, animals, perhaps strangers. When the wind pushes against the door, you hear it rattle softly. Your shelter answers with the low-grown timbers settling into themselves. By evening, when your muscles ache and your eyes grow heavy, you return to this structure not merely as a house, but as a refuge carved from effort. The walls hold the day's warmth. The hearth glows patiently. Shadows gather in familiar corners. You lay out bedding, once more adjusting it according to season and draft. And as you lie back staring at beams overhead, you understand that your sleep is inseparable from the craftsmanship, compromise, and sheer labour that raised these walls. The house is humble. It is imperfect. Yet it stands between you and a continent still being shaped. In its narrow embrace, you close your eyes, trusting timber and clay to guard your dreams until dawn returns. By the time evening settles again, you are back inside that single shared space, and you begin to understand how one room can contain an entire universe. The hearth glows at one end steady and alive, while the far wall fades into shadow. The table stands in the centre like a quiet anchor. It has already seen bread kneaded upon it, shirts mended, tools repaired, and lessons recited. Soon it will watch you sleep. A commonly accepted historical reality is that many rural families in the early to mid-19th century lived, worked, cooked, and slept in the same room. Separate kitchens and parlours existed in wealthier homes, but for ordinary households, space was layered rather than divided. You do not move from room to room to switch roles. You simply shift your posture, your tools, your light. You sit at the table now, rubbing tired hands together. The scent of stew still lingers in the air, mingling with smoke and wool. A pot cools slowly on the hearthstone. Children finish the last bites of supper, their spoons scraping bowls with small metallic sighs. There is no dishwasher humming discreetly in the background. Cleaning is immediate and practical. Bowls are rinsed in a basin, wiped dry with a cloth that has already served many purposes today. As darkness thickens, the room transforms. You feel it happening gradually. The tools are gathered and set aside. A spinning wheel that hummed earlier now stands silent in the corner. Chairs are shifted. A trundle bed is pulled out from beneath a larger frame. Straw ticks are fluffed by hand, though fluffing may be a generous description. The sound is more like rustling leaves than plumping feathers. Scholars continue to debate how these shared environments shaped family relationships over time. Did constant proximity strengthen bonds through shared experience, or did it limit personal identity and privacy in ways we struggle to imagine? As you watch your household move through its familiar choreography, you sense that affection and irritation likely coexisted in equal measure. There is comfort in never being alone. There is also the occasional longing for a corner of silence. A curious tidbit from the period reveals that in some households, especially in colder regions, livestock might be brought into an attached shed or even partially sheltered area, close to the main living quarters during severe weather. The warmth of animals, though accompanied by distinct smells, could make a measurable difference in winter survival. Imagine lying down at night aware that a cow or goat is separated from you by little more than a wall of planks. The line between domestic and agricultural life blurs gently. You light a candle, shielding the flame with your hand as it catches. Candlelight changes everything. Shadows stretch taller along the walls, faces glow softly, eyes reflecting gold. A widely recognized fact is that candles often made from tallow burned with a noticeable odor, and sometimes smoked if the wick was not trimmed properly. You notice the faint scent of animal fat in the air. It is not unpleasant, just familiar. Children climb into their shared bed, whispering last thoughts of the day. You can hear the low murmur of their voices rising and falling like distant waves. There is no hallway to carry the sound away. Every word exists in the same air you breathe. If someone coughs, everyone hears it. If someone laughs, it ripples through the room instantly. You move to your own bed, perhaps larger, though not by much. The mattress tick shifts beneath your weight. Rope stretched beneath the frame supports it, though over time the ropes loosen and must be tightened. The phrase sleep tight may have originated from this practical need to keep the cords taut, though historians still argue whether that popular explanation is entirely accurate. As you lie down, you feel the slight sag at the center. It is not luxurious, but exhaustion softens its edges. In this one room, nighttime does not erase the day. The table remains in view. The hearth still glows faintly. The tools rest against the wall, ready for morning. There is a sense of continuity that modern houses with their specialized spaces rarely offer. Your sleeping self is never far from your working self. The boundary between roles is gentle, not absolute. You notice how the air changes as the fire burns lower. Heat once pooled near the hearth begins to drift away. If it is winter, you tuck the quilt tighter under your chin. If it is summer, you push it aside and listen to insects chirring through an open window. The room breathes with the seasons. Another established historical observation is that household sizes were often larger than many today, with multiple children and sometimes extended family under one roof. In such close quarters, bedtime routines become communal events rather than private rituals. Prayers may be spoken aloud, a parent might recite a short passage from memory, or perhaps there is simply a shared moment of quiet before sleep claims each person in turn. The sounds of settling begin. Wood beams adjust to cooling temperatures with soft pops. The last coal in the hearth collapses inward. Someone shifts, causing the bed frame to creak in sympathy. You are acutely aware of every movement because the space amplifies it. There is no distant bedroom to muffle noise. Yet after a while, these sounds become as soothing as a lullaby. You close your eyes and imagine how different this feels from modern solitude. There is no separate nursery monitored by a device, no guest room standing empty. Every corner serves a purpose, every inch of space carries memory. Some researchers suggest that such arrangements fostered resilience in children who learned early to navigate shared environments. Others argue that the lack of personal space may have intensified generational tensions. As you drift towards sleep, you realize that both interpretations can exist at once. Life in one room is neither purely idyllic nor purely oppressive. It is simply practical. The candle is snuffed at last, darkness folds gently over the room. Without artificial glow, night feels complete, almost solid. You can sense the presence of others even without sight. A child's breathing steady and slow, your partner's warmth beside you, the faint smell of smoke lingering in the beams overhead. In this shared chamber, your dreams will mingle with theirs. You may not remember them in the morning, but you will wake together, step into the same light, and begin again within these same walls. One room holds it all, not by accident, but by necessity. And as sleep finally settles over you, the boundaries between living and resting dissolve into a single quiet rhythm. When the room finally exhales into darkness, you become acutely aware of what lies beneath you. Your bed is not an abstract idea of comfort. It is a construction of ropewood fabric and whatever stuffing you could gather at the time. As you settle your weight onto it, you feel every decision embedded in its layers. A well-documented truth about 19th century households is that mattresses were often filled with straw corn husks, dried grass, or feathers if a family could afford them. Featherbeds were prized soft and pliant moulding around the sleeper like a gentle embrace. But most ordinary families made do with what the land offered. Straw replaced once or twice a year carried the faint scent of fields even indoors. When you shift your hips, the mattress whispers back in a dry rustle. You reach down and pat the sturdy woven fabric that holds the stuffing inside. It feels coarse against your palm. Over time it thins in spots. A small tear might allow a few rebellious stalks to poke through, pricking lightly at night until you mend it. Nothing in this bed is disposable. Every piece must be maintained. Researchers have long examined how sleeping surfaces reflected economic status. Some maintain that the presence of multiple feather beds in probate inventories reveals rising comfort among certain rural families by mid-century. Others contend that such examples represent exceptions rather than the norm. As you lie here, you do not think in terms of inventory records. You think in terms of pressure points and warmth. Beneath the mattress, the rope lattice holds everything in place. If it slackens, the bed sags noticeably in the centre. You might have tightened it recently, pulling each cord taut with steady effort. There is something almost ceremonial in that act. You are literally preparing the ground on which you will surrender consciousness. An unexpected detail from the period is that some families used bed curtains even in modest homes. These were not only decorative, they helped trap heat around the sleeper and offered a sliver of privacy within shared quarters. Imagine drawing a simple fabric panel around your bed, creating a smaller world within the larger one-room space. The air inside grows slightly warmer, your breathing echoing softly in the enclosed space. The pillow beneath your head is modest. If stuffed with feathers, it may flatten quickly under weight. If filled with scraps of cloth or straw, it offers little more than symbolic support. You adjust it carefully, seeking that one position where neck and shoulder align. Comfort becomes an active pursuit rather than a passive expectation. Medical understanding of sleep in this era was limited by modern standards, yet advice manuals did circulate. A broadly accepted historical observation is that many 19th century writers emphasized fresh air and firm bedding as conducive to health. You might even leave a small window cracked despite cold, believing that stagnant air invites illness. The night breeze brushes your face sharp but clean. There were also stranger recommendations. Some household guides suggested rotating mattresses frequently to prevent uneven wear and discourage pests. And yes, pests were a reality. Bedbugs existed long before modern extermination methods. Families fought them with boiling water, sunlight, and vigilance. You glance at the seams of your mattress occasionally just to be sure. Sleep carries a hint of watchfulness. Experts continue to disagree about how widespread such infestations truly were in rural America compared to crowded urban housing. Letters from city dwellers describe persistent struggles, while farm diaries sometimes remain silent on the matter. Silence, of course, does not always equal absence. As you settle deeper into your bedding, you hope your household is fortunate. You pull the quilt higher. Quilts are more than decoration. They are layered textiles stitched with care, often by hand. Pieces of worn clothing find new life here. A faded shirt becomes part of a geometric pattern. A scrap of calico from a long, outgrown dress sits quietly near your shoulder. Each stitch carries memory. When you trace a seam with your fingertip, you are touching family history. In winter, multiple blankets may press down upon you, heavy but reassuring. The weight feels grounding, almost protective. In summer, you might strip the bed to a single sheet, the night air sliding across your skin. Seasons dictate not only how you work, but how you rest. There is also the matter of sharing. Many beds were not solitary spaces. Children often slept 2 or 3 to a mattress. Siblings learned to negotiate territory in the dark, an elbow here, a foot there, the gentle push and pull of bodies adjusting. For adults, sharing a bed was practical and intimate. Body heat conserved warmth. Personal space shrank to the width of a quilt. A recognized fact from domestic accounts of the era shows that beds were sometimes valuable enough to be listed individually in wills. A best bed might be reserved for guests or passed down deliberately to a specific child. The hierarchy of beds within a household reveals subtle layers of status and affection. You glance at your own bed and wonder where it would fall in such a list. There were even folk beliefs tied to beds. In certain communities, people avoided placing a bed directly opposite a door, fearing it invited restless sleep or misfortune. Others insisted on orienting the bed in a particular direction for better health. Though not universally practiced, such customs reveal how deeply people connected physical arrangement with unseen forces. As you lie here, you might adjust your position slightly just in case. The room is quiet now, your mattress molds to your shape, the rope beneath holds steady. Outside, wind brushes the walls, and you feel grateful for the barrier of wood and textile between you and the open land. Slows you realize that sleep does not demand perfection. It asks only for enough softness to let go, enough warmth to relax, and enough safety to close your eyes without fear. You turn onto your side, listening to the faint rustle of straw beneath you. The bed is simple, the quilt is worn, the pillow is modest. And still within this careful layering of rope and fabric you find what you need. The day recedes, the body yields, and the ordinary bed built from field and feather carries you gently toward morning once again. You do not fall asleep all at once. Instead, night gathers around you in layers, and with it come the sounds that daylight politely hides. Lying there beneath your quilt, you begin to notice how alive the darkness truly is. The fire in the hearth has settled into a low red glow. Every so often a coal collapses inward with a soft tick, sending a faint shimmer of sparks upward before fading. The wooden beams above you adjust to the cooling air, releasing gentle pops and sighs. These are ordinary sounds, expected sounds. Still in the hush of midnight, they can feel larger than life. A widely acknowledged historical reality is that most 19th century homes offered little insulation from the outside world. Walls were thinner, windows smaller, and chimneys imperfect. Sound travelled easily. If you live near forest or prairie, the night carries the distant call of owls or the restless movement of animals in brush. If you reside in a small town, you might hear a wagon rolling past, even at late hours, wheels crunching over dirt or cobblestone. You lie still, eyes open in the dark. The absence of electric light makes night feel almost tangible, like a thick velvet curtain drawn close. Your ears sharpen instinctively. There is the faint scratch of something along the outer wall. Probably a raccoon, perhaps, just branches shifting in the wind. Your mind briefly considers more dramatic possibilities, then gently returns to reason. Observers of the era have noted that fear of fire illness or intruders often lingered quietly in the background of domestic life. Without modern emergency services, families relied on vigilance and preparation. You might keep a bucket of water near the hearth. You might place tools within easy reach. Sleep comes, but it is not always careless. There were also superstitions woven into the fabric of night. Some communities believed that certain hours before dawn were more spiritually charged than others. A dog howling in the distance might be dismissed as ordinary or interpreted as an omen depending on local law. These beliefs varied widely, yet they reveal how mysterious night could feel when scientific explanations were less accessible. Historians continue to debate how deeply such fears shaped everyday sleep patterns. Some argue that anxiety over threats was constant and acute, particularly on the frontier. Others suggest that routine familiarity with surroundings reduced panic, making night sounds simply part of the landscape. As you listen to the wind trace its fingers along the roofline, you sense how quickly the extraordinary becomes ordinary when repeated often enough. Inside the room, someone shifts in bed. A child murmurs, caught halfway between dream and waking. You hear the subtle rhythm of breathing change, then steady again. Shared sleeping space means shared disturbances. One restless sleeper can ripple through the household. Yet it also means you are never alone with your thoughts for long. A documented fact from 19th century diaries shows that storms at night were particularly unsettling events. Thunder rolling across open land could shake windows and rattle dishes. Rain might leak through shingles, forcing quick adjustments even in darkness. You imagine heavy drops striking the roof, the scent of wet earth rising through cracks in the floorboards. In such moments you might rise briefly to check for leaks or ensure embers are safe. Then you return to bed, pulse gradually slowing. The darkness itself invites imagination. Without streetlights or glowing screens, your mind fills the void with memory and possibility. You might replay the day's labour in your thoughts. Did you stack the wood securely? Did you latch the door firmly? These quiet inventories serve as reassurance. There is also the question of dreams. While scientific study of sleep was still in its infancy, people of the 19th century often attributed meaning to vivid dreams. A particularly strange image might be discussed at breakfast. Some considered dreams divine messages. Others viewed them as simple reflections of daily concerns. Researchers today still disagree about how seriously ordinary families interpreted their dreams compared to more formal religious authorities. As you drift towards sleep, you wonder what your own mind will conjure. The wind picks up slightly, slipping through unseen cracks. It carries a scent of damp grass or distant water. You pull the quilt closer, nestling into its familiar weight. The bed beneath you shifts subtly as your partner turns. Warmth presses against your back, reassuring and steady. In the far corner, a faint scratching resumes. This time you recognize it. Likely a mouse beneath the floorboards seeking crumbs or warmth. Such small intrusions were common companions in pre-modern homes. Families set traps, sealed gaps as best they could, and accepted a certain level of coexistence. The sound fades, replaced by the low hum of night insects beyond the window. Gradually your body responds to the rhythm around you. Breathing slows, muscles loosen. The creaks of wood and sigh of wind blend into a single gentle murmur. What once felt sharp now feels distant. Some nights are peaceful, others hold unexpected disruptions. A sudden knock at the door might signal a neighbour in need. A sick child might wake coughing, drawing you upright in an instant. These interruptions are not rare exceptions, but woven threads in the tapestry of ordinary life. Sleep is valued precisely because it can be so fragile. As you hover at the edge of dreaming, the room seems to soften. Even the darkness feels less imposing. The familiar layout of table, hearth and bed remains fixed in your memory, though unseen. You know exactly how many steps it would take to reach the door if needed. This knowledge is its own comfort. Night on the 19th century landscape is vast, sometimes intimidating, often beautiful. But within these walls you carve out a small sphere of relative safety. The sounds continue, yet they no longer demand your attention. They become background like distant waves. Your eyelids grow heavy. The scratch in the corner has ceased. The wind settles into a quieter whisper. Around you, the breathing of your family creates a soft, collective rhythm steady as a heartbeat. At last, the boundary between waking and sleep dissolves. The night keeps its watch outside. Inside you surrender to rest, trusting timber rope and shared presence to carry you safely through the dark until the first pale hint of dawn returns once more. Even before your eyes fully close, you sense how evening has its own ceremony. It does not announce itself with fanfare. It settles gradually like a shawl placed over tired shoulders. By the time darkness thickens, your household has already moved through a series of small familiar rituals that guide everyone toward rest. As twilight fades, the hearth becomes the centre of gravity. A widely recognised historical pattern shows that in most 19th century homes, especially in rural areas, the fireplace served as the primary source of both heat and light. You draw your chair closer, feeling warmth against your shins. Flames flicker, casting soft gold across faces lined by wind and work. Shadows sway gently along the walls, stretching and shrinking with each movement of the fire. Supper dishes have been cleared. The scent of cooked beans or stew still lingers, faintly mingling with wood smoke. Someone might hum a quiet tune while mending a shirt. Another pares a sliver of wood into kindling for the morning. These tasks are not dramatic, yet they mark the shift from day to night. Work slows, movements soften, voices lower. Some families read aloud in the evening if they owned books, a Bible, a collection of sermons, perhaps a borrowed novel if fortune allowed. Literacy rates were steadily rising throughout the century, though access to printed material varied by region and wealth. You imagine yourself listening as a steady voice recites a passage by firelight. The cadence is calm, measured. Even if you struggle to follow every word, the sound itself soothes. There were also lighter moments. Oral storytelling thrived in many households. Folk tales passed from generation to generation, embellished slightly each time. A humorous anecdote about a stubborn mule might ripple into gentle laughter. These shared stories created memory-binding family members in narrative as well as blood. Researchers continue to discuss how much of daily life relied on such spoken traditions versus written ones, but within your walls, spoken words clearly hold power. You glance toward the candle on the table. Candles were precious enough that many families used them sparingly. Once the fire burned low, you might rely on its glow rather than light another wick. Kerosene lamps became more common later in the century, offering brighter illumination, yet they too required careful handling. A documented fact of the period notes that accidental lamp fires were not uncommon, reminding families to treat light as both necessity and risk. Prayer often found its place in this quiet hour. Kneeling beside the bed or standing together near the hearth, you might bow your head in gratitude or petition. Faith shaped many households, offering reassurance against uncertainty. Though expressions varied by denomination and region, evening devotion was a familiar rhythm in countless homes. Some historians suggest these rituals provided emotional stability in environments where physical security could never be fully guaranteed. As the fire settles, you stir embers carefully. banking the fire for the night becomes a practiced art. Ash is drawn over glowing coals to preserve heat until morning. If done well, you will not need to strike sparks at dawn. If done poorly, you may wake to cold silence and extra labour. The responsibility feels small yet significant. Children grow drowsy by the hearth. Their eyelids droop as warmth seeps into them. You might guide them gently toward the bed, smoothing hair back from foreheads, tucking quilts around small shoulders. There is tenderness in these gestures, even if the day was long and patience thin. An unusual custom found in some communities involved warming bedclothes with a metal bed warmer. This pan filled with hot coals was passed between sheets to chase away the chill before anyone climbed in. It required care and steady hands. You imagine the faint metallic scent mingling with warm linen as the pan glides beneath blankets. Such small luxuries transformed a cold bed into something welcoming. Conversation at this hour tends to drift. Plans for tomorrow are discussed in low tones. Weather predictions are guessed at by reading the sky's colour at dusk. A neighbour's news might be revisited briefly. There is less urgency now, the body is tired and the mind follows. Experts still examine how these evening patterns shifted as industrialisation advanced. In cities where factories demanded early shifts or long hours, routines could become more rigid. Artificial lighting extended productivity but also delayed sleep. Yet in many rural settings, natural light remained the dominant clock. When the sun disappeared, so too did most activity. You rise at last and prepare for bed. Boots are set neatly near the door. Clothing is folded carefully to be worn again tomorrow. Water is checked, door latched, embers covered. Each action carries a sense of completion. The day is finished as thoroughly as it can be. When you slide beneath the quilt, warmth still clings faintly from the hearth. The air feels cooler now, yet not harsh. You turn your head slightly and see the last faint glow of coals pulsing gently in the dark. It resembles a steady heartbeat at the edge of sight. Outside, night has fully claimed the land. Inside, your family settles into collective stillness. The rituals are simple, repeated countless times across farms, towns, and settlements. They require no ceremony beyond repetition. As your breathing slows, you realize how these small acts have guided you gently toward rest. The tending of fire, the murmur of stories, the final prayer, the careful banking of embers. Each step eases the mind, signaling that nothing more can be done until morning. The room cools gradually. The glow fades to a dull red, then to shadow. In that fading light, you feel a quiet satisfaction. Evening has been honoured properly, the household is secure, and so you close your eyes, carried not only by exhaustion but by ritual. Night wraps around you once more, steady and familiar as the hearth keeps its silent watch until dawn returns. When winter arrives in full authority, night feels longer, heavier, almost endless. You sense it the moment you wake before dawn, and the world beyond your walls remains wrapped in deep blue shadow. The air inside the room bites gently at your nose. Your breath hovers faintly before disappearing. Cold in the 19th century is not an inconvenience, it is a presence. A firmly established historical understanding tells us that many families relied almost entirely on fireplaces or simple stoves for heat, and these rarely warmed an entire dwelling evenly. If you sleep near the hearth, you are fortunate. If your bed rests along an outer wall, you may feel the draught slip beneath your quilt like an uninvited guest. You draw the blankets closer around your shoulders. Quilts layered thickly become your shield. Wool socks might remain on your feet overnight, though not everyone owned such comforts. In some households, people even wore caps to bed to conserve body heat. It may not look elegant, but survival rarely prioritizes elegance. The wind outside presses against the house with steady insistence. Snow gathers along the base of the walls, sometimes forming natural insulation. There is a strange comfort in that. The same snow that isolates you also muffles sound, turning the outside world into a soft, distant hush. Scholars continue to examine how communities adapted to severe winters in different regions. In New England, where cold could linger stubbornly, homes were often constructed with central chimneys to distribute heat more efficiently. In other areas, adaptation depended more on layered clothing and strategic sleeping arrangements. As you nestle closer to your partner or shift children nearer to the warmest corner, you realize that architecture and affection often worked hand in hand. An intriguing detail from this period reveals that in especially cold spells, families sometimes shared beds more densely than usual to conserve warmth. Privacy shrank further, but comfort increased. The collective body heat beneath layered quilts created a small climate of its own. You can imagine the steady warmth radiating from those around you, a quiet reassurance against the frozen darkness pressing at the walls. A broadly accepted fact about winter living is that chores multiplied rather than diminished. Firewood had to be cut and carried daily. Water from wells might freeze, requiring extra effort to break ice. All of this labour shaped how deeply you slept. Physical exhaustion often pulled you swiftly into slumber, though the cold could also wake you abruptly if the fire burned too low. Before bed, you bank the hearth carefully, covering embers with ash to preserve them until morning. If you fail, you may wake to a room so cold that your fingers stiffen before you can strike flint. The responsibility rests lightly yet persistently on your mind as you drift off. There is also the matter of illness. Winter brought increased risk of respiratory ailments. Crowded indoor living during cold months meant that coughs and fevers spread easily. Historians still debate how much seasonal illness influenced mortality rates compared to other factors like sanitation and nutrition. As you lie listening to a child's faint cough across the room, you feel the weight of that uncertainty. The night stretches longer in winter. Without artificial light to extend activity, you may find yourself in bed for more hours than during summer months. Yet more time in bed does not always equal better rest. The cold can seep slowly through walls and blankets, nudging you awake to adjust your position. You tuck your hands beneath your arms, curl slightly inward, and allow your own body heat to gather. Outside, the landscape rests beneath a white hush. Moonlight reflecting off snow can brighten the room, faintly casting pale patterns across the ceiling beams. It is beautiful, almost serene. At the same time, the knowledge of isolation lingers. Heavy snowfall can delay travel, limit access to neighbours, and complicate emergencies. You sleep with awareness that assistance might not arrive quickly if needed. There were practical innovations emerging as the century progressed. Cast iron stoves became more common in some areas, offering more consistent heat than open hearths. Yet they required fuel and careful maintenance. Some families embraced them eagerly. Others remained loyal to the familiar fireplace. Researchers still explore how quickly such technologies spread beyond urban centres into rural communities. You roll slightly, feeling the mattress shift beneath layers of blankets. The straw rustles faintly, but warmth has settled comfortably now. Your breathing evens out. The cold no longer feels sharp. It feels distant, held at bay by quilt and kinship. Occasionally you wake in the deep hours of night and listen. The house is quieter in winter. Fewer insects hum. Leaves no longer rustle. Even animals seem subdued. The dominant sound is the faint crackle of wood contracting in the cold. It is a reminder that the house itself endures the season alongside you. Morning will come slowly. Light will creep across frost-edged window panes. You will rise and stir the embers, coaxing flame back to life with careful hands. The cycle continues day after day until spring loosens winter's grip. Yet for now, wrapped in layers of wool and cotton, surrounded by steady breathing, you feel something deeply human. Winter nights demand cooperation. They require preparation, patience, and trust in shared shelter. The cold remains outside, persistent but contained. Inside, beneath the weight of blankets and the quiet strength of timber walls, you surrender again to sleep. And as snow drifts silently against the door, you rest within the fragile but determined warmth that ordinary families across 19th century America created for themselves each long winter night. When summer arrives, the rhythm of night changes completely. You feel it long before you lie down. The air itself carries weight warm and thick, clinging to your skin even after the sun has dipped below the horizon. The hearth, once your winter ally, now seems like an unnecessary furnace. You let its fire burn low or not at all. It's widely acknowledged that in much of 19th century America, especially in the South and along humid river valleys, summer nights could be stifling. Without electric fans or modern ventilation, families relied on open windows, strategic airflow, and patience. You push the shutters wide, hoping for a breeze. The night air drifts in, carrying scents of grass, river mud, or distant livestock. Your bed feels different, you know? Quilts are folded away or reduced to a single light covering. A linen sheet rests against your skin, cool at first, then quickly warmed by your own body. You stretch out, claiming as much space as possible, though space remains limited. Bodies that huddled together for warmth in winter now spread apart instinctively. Researchers have long examined how architecture adapted to hot climates. In certain regions, houses were built with higher ceilings to allow heat to rise, or with wide porches that shaded walls from direct sun. In other areas, families simply endured. Scholars continue to explore how quickly such design innovations reached ordinary households compared to wealthier estates. As you lie there, fanning yourself with a scrap of paper or cloth, you sense that adaptation often depended on means. An unexpected detail from the era reveals that some people hung damp sheets in doorways or windows to cool incoming air slightly. The effect was modest but noticeable. You can imagine the faint scent of wet fabric as the breeze slips through, brushing your face with a hint of relief. The night sounds of summer are louder than winter's hush. Insects hum in steady chorus. Crickets pulse rhythmically from the grass. If you live near water, frogs join the symphony. The sheer volume can feel almost overwhelming at first, yet soon it becomes a backdrop constant and oddly soothing. A firmly established historical reality is that mosquitoes pose serious discomfort and even danger in certain regions, particularly where malaria was present. Families use smoke netting if available, and various home remedies to deter them. You might drape a thin fabric loosely around your bed, creating a fragile barrier. Or you may simply wave your hand occasionally in sleepy irritation. Heat influences your sleep in subtle ways. You toss more frequently, seeking cooler patches of mattress. Straw beneath you feels warmer than usual, holding the day's heat longer than you would prefer. You turn your pillow over, searching for the cool side that offers temporary comfort. Some historians still debate whether people in hotter climates adjusted their daily schedules more dramatically than we often assume. Did midday rest periods become common among ordinary labourers, or were such breaks limited to specific regions and classes? As you lie awake in the lingering warmth, you suspect that exhaustion often forced adaptation regardless of social theory. Children are restless in summer. Limbs tangle and untangle as they chase cooler air. You hear a small sigh from across the room, followed by the soft slap of a hand against skin chasing an insect. Even in sleep, the body responds to its environment. Windows remain open, which changes the sense of security slightly. The night feels closer, less filtered. You can hear distant voices if neighbours sit on their own porches. Perhaps someone strums a fiddle softly, the melody drifting through warm darkness. Community feels nearer in summer carried on open air. There were also folk practices meant to predict the weather during these months. Some families believed that particularly loud insect choruses signalled heat that would persist. Others watched the behaviour of livestock or the colour of sunset skies. While not scientifically rigorous, these observations shaped expectation and conversation. You find yourself listening carefully, wondering what tomorrow's heat might bring. The scent of earth rises strongly after a brief evening rain. Moisture lingers, thickening the air further. You shift again, letting one arm rest outside the sheet. The mattress creaks softly beneath you. Sweat cools slowly on your skin. A documented feature of urban life during the later 19th century was the practice of sleeping on rooftops or fire escapes during intense heat waves. Though not universal, it reveals the lengths to which families went for relief. You imagine climbing a narrow stair to a flat roof, lying beneath open Sky City, sounds murmuring below. For those in crowded tenements, such measures were sometimes the only escape from suffocating interiors. Back in your own modest room, you focus on small comforts. A faint breeze at last threads through the window, lifting the edge of the curtain. It brushes across your face like a gentle hand. The insects continue their chorus, but the air feels marginally lighter. Experts continue to examine how seasonal extremes influenced long-term health and sleep quality in the 19th century. Without temperature control, the body adapted continuously, sometimes gracefully, sometimes with strain. As you breathe slowly, you feel both the resilience and the vulnerability in that adaptation. Gradually, fatigue overcomes discomfort. Your muscles loosen despite the warmth. The night sounds merge into a steady hum. You drift into a lighter, more restless sleep than in winter, yet sleep nonetheless. Summer does not offer the heavy cocoon of cold months. Instead, it surrounds you with living sound and lingering heat. Yet within these open windows and shared breaths, you find another version of rest. It is thinner, more porous, but still enough to carry you through to morning. And as dawn eventually seeps pale and humid into the room, you will rise once more, already aware that tonight the dance with warmth and wind will begin again. As the seasons turn and years pass, you begin to notice how children fit into this nightly landscape. They do not occupy separate, carefully themed bedrooms. They exist within the same shared air, learning the rhythm of the household long before they understand the word routine. In many 19th century homes, children slept in the same room as their parents for years. This is not unusual. It is expected. A broadly accepted historical observation is that separate children's bedrooms were more common in wealthier households, while ordinary families arranged bedding wherever space allowed. You might see a trundle bed tucked beneath the main frame, pulled out only at night, or a simple pallet laid near the hearth in winter, moved farther away in summer. You watch as the youngest child rubs sleepy eyes, curls already damp from a warm evening. There is no bedtime storybook with glossy illustrations unless someone in the household has carefully saved for such a luxury. Instead, stories are spoken. A parent might recount a memory from their own childhood or offer a brief moral tale meant to soothe and instruct at once. Scholars continue to examine how early exposure to adult conversation shaped children's understanding of the world. In shared sleeping quarters, young ears absorb discussions about crops, money, illness, even politics. Some argue this fostered maturity at an earlier age. Others suggest it limited the carefree isolation that modern childhood often assumes. As you listen to a child breathing steadily beside you, you sense that both views contain truth. There are also practical concerns. Infants often slept in simple wooden cradles positioned near the parent's bed. The gentle rocking motion could soothe them through the night. An interesting detail from domestic accounts reveals that some cradles were ingeniously designed to be rocked by a foot, while the caregiver remained seated multitasking even in moments of rest. You imagine the faint creak of curved wood, the soft sway beneath a tiny blanket. Nighttime accidents were common, particularly among younger children. Bedding needed frequent airing and washing when weather permitted. Laundry itself was labour-intensive, often reserved for specific days and dependent on available water and fuel. You might hang small sheets outside, watching them snap lightly in the breeze, hoping for quick drying before evening returns. A well-established historical fact is that children were expected to contribute to household labour from a young age. This influenced how they slept. After long days of chores, whether gathering eggs, carrying water, or assisting in fields, fatigue claimed them swiftly. You rarely have to coax them into bed. Their heads touch straw and sleep follows. Yet children also carried fears into the dark. The same night sounds that you have learned to interpret calmly might feel mysterious to them. A sudden gust of wind rattling shutters can prompt a whispered question from the trundle bed. You answer softly, explaining the ordinary nature of the sound. In doing so, you pass down not only reassurance but practical knowledge. Researchers still debate how widespread formal schooling was in various regions and how that influenced sleep schedules. In communities with established schools, children might wake early to walk considerable distances. In more remote areas, education happened sporadically at home, allowing for slightly more flexibility. As you think of tomorrow's tasks, you consider whether a child will carry a slate underarm or a bucket in hand. There were also customs surrounding infants that reveal a different understanding of safety. In some households, babies were swaddled snugly at night to prevent startling themselves awake. Others preferred looser arrangements. Advice varied, often passed orally from mother to daughter. You adjust a small blanket, gently ensuring warmth without heaviness. The room grows quieter as one by one children drift fully into sleep. Limbs relax, soft snores begin. You notice how differently each child breathes, one with a faint whistle through the nose, another with a slow, steady rhythm. These sounds become as familiar as your own heartbeat. An additional curiosity from the period is that older siblings sometimes shared beds not only for warmth but for supervision. An older child might comfort a younger one during the night, serving as both companion and guardian. Responsibility seeped naturally into family structure. Even rest carried layers of duty. There is limited evidence to suggest that bedtime was strictly enforced by a clock. Rather, darkness itself dictated timing. When the candle burned low and eyes drooped, sleep followed. This flexibility may have allowed children to align more closely with natural light cycles. Some historians propose that such alignment supported healthier rest patterns. Others caution that household demands often overrode biological rhythms. As you observe your family, you see how necessity shapes theory. The closeness of shared sleeping fosters intimacy that modern separation rarely replicates. You are aware of a child's fever the moment it rises. You hear a nightmare before it fully forms. Comfort is immediate because distance is minimal. At the same time, space remains scarce. As children grow taller, beds feel smaller. Elbows bump, toes intrude. Adjustments are constant. Eventually, older sons or daughters may move into loft spaces or small adjoining rooms if the house expands. That transition marks a quiet milestone, a subtle step toward independence. For now, though, you lie within a room gently filled with youthful breathing. Outside insects continue their low chorus. Inside, the warmth of small bodies mingles with yours. You reflect briefly on how differently childhood unfolds here compared to later centuries. Fewer toys, fewer personal possessions, more shared experience. Night is not solitary, it is communal. As your eyes grow heavy once more, you sense how deeply children anchor the household's rhythm. Their needs shape the timing of meals, chores, and rest. Their presence alters the soundscape of night. In this simple room under a single roof, generations overlap not just in conversation, but in sleep itself. And as you drift again toward dreams, you do so surrounded by the steady reassurance of those small sleeping forms that define both your responsibility and your comfort in equal measure. As children grow and bodies mature, the question of privacy begins to surface quietly within the same shared room. You may not have separate chambers lined with doors that click shut, yet human nature still seeks moments of seclusion. In the 19th century, home privacy is negotiated rather than guaranteed. You lie awake for a moment aware of the subtle choreography that unfolds each evening. Older children turn their faces toward the wall. Parents lower their voices. Movements become measured. A well-established historical understanding shows that many ordinary households lacked dedicated bedrooms for each family member, especially before the late 19th century. Curtain screens or the simple turning of backs served as practical boundaries. You notice how the room adjusts itself to unspoken rules. When you and your partner whisper, you keep your tone low, careful not to disturb others. Affection becomes discreet, folded into gestures rather than displayed openly. The closeness of shared space shapes intimacy in ways that modern architecture rarely demands. Researchers continues to examine how concepts of modesty evolved alongside changing domestic layouts. Some suggest that as houses grew larger and more compartmentalized toward the end of the century, ideas about personal space and propriety intensified. Others argue that modesty was already deeply ingrained long before walls multiplied. As you shift slightly beneath the quilt, you feel how custom and circumstance blend seamlessly here. An intriguing detail from household accounts reveals that in some homes, especially those with slightly more means, just folding screens were used to divide space temporarily. These screens might be simple wooden frames with fabric stretched across them. When positioned thoughtfully, they offered a suggestion of separation rather than full isolation. You can imagine the faint shadow of movement cast against such a screen by candlelight, soft and indistinct. Changing clothes at night requires its own choreography. You might turn your back, move quickly, or use a shared blanket as cover. Practicality overrides embarrassment, yet modesty is preserved through habit. Children learn early to avert their eyes when appropriate, not because walls enforce it, but because community expectation does. A commonly accepted historical fact is that many beds were shared by necessity, including by siblings of the same gender well into adolescence. Space dictated arrangements more than preference. This proximity shaped sibling bonds, sometimes deepening them, sometimes creating friction. You recall a time when two children argued over quilt territory only to fall asleep moments later, breaths synchronized despite earlier protest. The single room becomes a study in layered awareness. You are conscious of others even when they are silent. The creak of a bed frame, the soft exhale of breath, the shift of straw beneath ticking. Each sound is amplified by proximity. Over time, you learn which noises require attention and which can be safely ignored. Scholars still debate how such constant togetherness influenced emotional development. Did it nurture empathy through continuous observation of others, or did it limit the cultivation of individual identity? As you reflect in the dark, you sense that identity here is woven tightly into family fabric. Individual threads exist, but they are rarely displayed in isolation. Marriage within these walls carries its own complexities. Without separate quarters, newly married couples in extended households may find privacy scarce. Historical letters occasionally hint at creative solutions, from brief walks at dusk to carefully timed routines. Such hints are subtle, yet they reveal that intimacy found ways to persist despite spatial limits. The room itself holds witness to all of this. By day it is workspace, classroom, kitchen. By night it becomes sleeping chamber for multiple lives at once. The transition is not abrupt. It is gradual, shaped by light fading and voices softening. You remember how earlier in winter everyone huddled together for warmth. Now, even in milder weather, that closeness remains part of habit. Physical distance may expand slightly as children grow, yet emotional proximity lingers. There were also cultural variations across regions and immigrant communities regarding sleeping arrangements. Some traditions place strong emphasis on gender separation after a certain age, prompting families to rearrange furniture or convert lofts into makeshift sleeping spaces. Researchers continue to explore how these traditions blended with American conditions, adapting to both necessity and belief. In the quiet, you consider how different this feels from a modern house with corridors and locks. Here silence is shared. Secrets are harder to keep, yet loneliness is rarer too. The room holds laughter, arguments, whispered reassurances, and the steady rhythm of collective breathing. You adjust your position, slightly aware of your partner's presence beside you. The quilt rises and falls gently with each breath. Across the room, a child turns over, causing the trundle to creak softly. No one speaks, no one needs to. Privacy here is not about isolation. It is about mutual respect within limited space. It is about knowing when to look away, when to lower your voice, when to wait. These subtle understandings shape nightly life just as surely as timber and rope shape the bed beneath you. As sleep gradually claims you, you feel neither exposed nor entirely hidden. You are part of a small breathing constellation within one room. Boundaries exist though they are invisible. And in this delicate balance between closeness and restraint, ordinary families across 19th century America found ways to rest love and grow beneath a single shared roof. Illness enters the room quietly. It does not knock. It simply announces itself in a cough that lingers too long a forehead that feels warmer than it should beneath your palm. In a 19th century household, sickness does not retreat to a separate guest room. It settles among everyone, altering the rhythm of sleep for all. You wake in the night to the sound of uneven breathing. At first you think it is a dream, but then you hear it again, a small strained inhale from the trundle bed. You rise immediately, quilt slipping from your shoulders, bare feet meeting the cool floor. There is no hallway to cross, no door to open. The child is only a few steps away. A widely recognized historical reality is that infectious diseases spread rapidly in close living quarters. Before modern vaccines and antibiotics, families relied on home remedies, prayer and community knowledge. You press your hand gently to a fevered brow, noting the warmth. A basin of water sits near the hearth. You dip a cloth and lay it across flushed skin. Medical advice during this century varied widely. Some physicians promoted bleeding and purging earlier in the period, while later decades saw gradual shifts toward less invasive treatments. Ordinary families often blended professional guidance with traditional remedies passed down through generations. You might brew a tea of willow bark or chamomile, trusting experience as much as theory. Scholars continue to examine how families balanced emerging medical science with established folk practices. Did they embrace new methods quickly, or did caution prevail? As you kneel beside the bed in flickering firelight, you understand that survival often depended less on ideology and more on immediate judgment. The night stretches longer when someone is ill. Sleep becomes fragmented, measured in short intervals between checks. You return to your own bed briefly, only to wake again at the faintest sound. The rest of the household stirs lightly, sensing the tension even without forståelse. Shared space amplifies concern. A curious detail from domestic manuals of the era suggests that sick rooms were sometimes separated by hanging sheets, soaked in vinegar believed to purify the air. While not universally practiced, it reveals the earnest attempts to control unseen threats. You imagine a pale cloth suspended in the dim light, its sharp scent mingling with smoke and wool. A well-documented fact is that mortality rates, especially among children, were significantly higher in the 19th century than today. This reality cast a quiet shadow over family life. Parents cherished small improvements in a child's condition because outcomes were never guaranteed. You watch carefully for signs of easing breath or cooling skin. There were also periods when illness swept through entire communities. Epidemics of influenza, cholera, or measles could leave multiple households struggling at once. In such times, neighbours assisted when they could, bringing broth or tending fires. Yet fear also lingered, as contact carried risk. Historians still debate how communities balanced compassion with self-preservation during outbreaks. You feel the weight of responsibility keenly. Without specialized medical facilities nearby, much of care rests in your hands. The night becomes a vigil. The fire is kept slightly brighter than usual, not for warmth alone, but for visibility. Shadows dance along the walls as you sit upright listening. The rest of the family sleeps unevenly. One child murmurs in confusion. Another turns over, sensing something is wrong without knowing it. You whisper reassurance softly, even if only to yourself. In these moments, the ordinary comforts of bed and quilt feel fragile. The straw mattress that supported you so faithfully now becomes a place of worry. You smooth blankets, carefully adjusting them around small shoulders. Every movement is deliberate. Medical understanding of contagion was still developing throughout the century. The germ theory of disease gained broader acceptance only in the latter half. Before that shift, explanations for illness ranged from miasma or bad air to divine will. As you sit in the glow of the hearth, you are less concerned with theory than with breath and pulse. Gradually the fever breaks or steadies. The breathing evens slightly. You allow yourself a slow exhale. Fatigue presses heavily on your eyelids, yet you remain alert. The room feels warmer now, though perhaps that is only relief spreading through your body. Night care changes how you experience sleep. You learn to rest lightly. Ears are tuned even in dreams. Over time, this vigilance becomes second nature. It is another skill carved quietly into the fabric of ordinary life. By the time dawn approaches, pale light filtering through the window, you feel both exhausted and grateful. The worst may have passed, or it may not. Uncertainty lingers. You return briefly to your bed, aware that true rest has been postponed. The quilt settles around you once more. Across the room, the small figure lies more peacefully than before. In this shared space, illness cannot be hidden. It demands attention from all, yet it also reveals the depth of care woven into these modest walls. Night becomes not only a time of vulnerability but of steadfast watchfulness. And as morning finally stretches its quiet fingers across the floorboards, you realize that sleep in 19th century America was never simply about closing one's eyes. It was about enduring together, tending one another, and trusting that within timber walls and shared breath, healing might find its way before the next night falls again. When illness recedes and ordinary nights return, another layer of evening life comes gently into focus. Faith settles into the room as naturally as firelight. It is not always dramatic or loud. Often it is quiet, woven into habit, spoken in a tone meant as much for comfort as conviction. You sit on the edge of your bed while the last glow of the hearth flickers. Hands fold together, not because anyone has issued a command, but because this is what the day has always led to. A firmly grounded historical understanding shows that religious belief shaped daily routines for many 19th century American families, whether Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, or members of smaller denominations. Bedtime prayers were common across regions, though the words themselves varied. You bow your head and speak softly. Gratitude for harvest, for safety, for the small mercies of health. A request for protection through the night. Children sometimes recite memorized lines, voices uneven but earnest. The rhythm of prayer slows breathing, steadies the mind. Researchers continued to explore how deeply these nightly devotions influenced emotional resilience. Some maintain that faith provided psychological comfort in uncertain environments. Others suggest that routine itself, regardless of theology, created stability. As you lift your head and glance at the dim outline of your family, you sense how ritual anchors the heart as much as doctrine does. There were also folk beliefs that mingled with formal religion. In certain communities, people avoided whistling indoors at night, fearing it invited misfortune. Others believed that placing a Bible beneath a pillow could guard against troubling dreams. While not universally practiced, such customs reveal how spiritual assurance sometimes blended with superstition. You smile faintly at the thought, adjusting your pillow without comment. A widely accepted historical fact is that church attendance on Sundays was a central feature of community life in many areas. Sermons often addressed moral conduct, family roles, and preparation for eternity. These teachings filtered into nightly reflections. You may find yourself replaying a phrase from last Sunday's message as you drift towards sleep. Candles are lowered, the room dims further, yet conversation does not end entirely. Sometimes older children ask questions in the dark. What happens after death? Why storms frighten them? Whether angels truly watch over the house? Answers come gently shaped by belief and love in equal measure. Historians still debate how uniform religious observance truly was across the expanding nation. Frontier regions sometimes lacked regular clergy leading families to conduct their own services at home. In urban centres, churches of many denominations stood within walking distance. As you lie in the quiet, you understand that faith adapts to circumstance, just as architecture does. An unusual custom noted in some diaries involves marking significant events, births, deaths, or extraordinary weather within the family Bible. These records preserved memory long before official documents were common. You imagine such a book resting on a small shelf nearby, pages filled with careful script. It represents both devotion and documentation. Even for those less devout, night often invited reflection. Without artificial distraction, thoughts naturally turned inward. You might consider the morality of a decision made earlier that day. Did you speak too sharply? Did you act with fairness? The darkness provides a gentle space for self-examination. In certain immigrant communities, bedtime rituals included songs carried from distant homelands. A lullaby sung in German, Irish, Gaelic, or another language might float softly across the room. Though the walls are American timber, the melody carries echoes of elsewhere. Scholars continue to examine how these private expressions preserved cultural identity across generations. The room grows still. You feel the mattress beneath you, the quilt drawn up to your chin. Prayer has ended, but its quiet lingers like warmth from the hearth. There is comfort in believing that the night is not entirely indifferent. Whether protection comes from divine oversight or from the steady presence of family, you feel less alone in the dark. A breeze slips through the window, stirring the edge of a curtain. You listen to its soft movement and let your thoughts settle. The worries of the day feel slightly smaller when framed by faith. Even uncertainty about harvest or health seems more manageable when entrusted to something beyond your immediate control. Experts still examine how religious conviction intersected with social reform movements during this century, from abolition to temperance. Yet within your room, belief feels simpler. It is about reassurance, about continuity, about telling a child that tomorrow will come and that whatever it brings you, we'll face it together. Your breathing slows. The house is quiet now, except for the faint sigh of wind against wood. In this stillness, you sense how belief, whether formal or personal, acts as another blanket laid gently across the household. And so you close your eyes, carrying with you not only the weight of quilts, but the soft echo of prayer and song. Night stretches ahead, uncertain yet held within a web of meaning that ordinary families across 19th century America wove carefully evening after evening before surrendering to sleep once more. As years pass and communities expand, new voices enter the room with unfamiliar accents and customs carried carefully across oceans. You notice how the rhythms of evening begin to shift in subtle ways as immigrant families settle into American towns and rural landscapes. The walls may be built of local timber, yet the habits inside them often echo distant homelands. A broadly recognized historical reality is that the 19th century saw significant waves of immigration to the United States, including large numbers from Ireland, Germany, Scandinavia, and later southern and eastern Europe. Many newcomers arrived with few possessions, yet they carried deeply rooted domestic traditions. You can imagine a German mother spreading a featherbed brought from home its ticking stitch decades earlier, or an Irish father whispering a prayer learned in childhood across the Atlantic. Within shared sleeping quarters, old and new customs blended quietly. You might hear a lullaby sung in a language that neighbours do not understand. The melody floats gently through the dark, soft and reassuring. Children absorb both English phrases from school, and ancestral words from home, drifting to sleep in a bilingual hush. Researchers continue to explore how immigrant families balance preservation of tradition with adaptation to American conditions. Did they cling tightly to old routines at bedtime, or did necessity reshape them quickly? As you lie in a room that smells faintly of cabbage soup or rye bread, unfamiliar to earlier settlers, you sense that adaptation and memory coexist easily. An intriguing detail from personal letters of the era reveals that some immigrants considered American mattresses surprisingly different from those in Europe. Straw stuffing might feel coarser than featherbeds left behind. In response, families sometimes saved diligently to purchase improved bedding once finances allowed. You imagine the pride in laying down a newly acquired mattress, a small symbol of stability in a foreign land. A well-documented fact shows that many immigrant families initially lived in crowded tenements in urban centres. These buildings often held multiple families on a single floor with thin walls and shared corridors. Sleep in such environments required tolerance for constant noise. You hear footsteps overhead, voices through plaster, a baby crying somewhere down the hall. Privacy becomes even more delicate than in rural cabins. Scholars still debate how these cramped conditions influence long-term health and social mobility. Some argue that adversity fostered resilience and tight community bonds. Others emphasize the toll on physical well-being and rest. As you imagine lying on a narrow bed in a city apartment, windows open to the clatter of streetcars, you feel how different this is from prairie silence. In rural immigrant settlements, houses sometimes mirrored designs from home countries. Scandinavian settlers in the Midwest, for instance, occasionally built structures with layouts reminiscent of their homeland. Sleeping arrangements might reflect older patterns with extended family under one roof. Such continuity offered emotional comfort even when surroundings were unfamiliar. Food traditions also shape the feel of night. The scent lingering in the air after supper might be spiced differently, seasoned with memories of elsewhere. That aroma clings to quilts and clothing, becoming part of the sensory landscape of sleep. A curious custom observed in certain communities involved placing protective charms near a child's bed, small tokens meant to ward off bad dreams. These might be religious medals, woven symbols, or simple objects imbued with meaning. Though not universally practiced, they reveal how belief travelled alongside people adapting to new soil without losing its roots. You notice how language softens at bedtime. Parents may switch to their native tongue for prayers or stories preserving cadence and familiarity. Children respond instinctively even if they answer in English during daylight hours. The dark seems to invite memory. A commonly accepted historical insight is that immigrant neighbourhoods often clustered by origin-reinforcing shared custom. This meant that even in crowded cities, bedtime rituals could remain culturally specific for decades. Yet over time, influences blended. A German lullaby might mingle with an American folk tune. A Catholic evening prayer might coexist with secular Puwad habits learned from neighbour. Historians continue to examine how quickly generational shifts occurred. Did children of immigrants adopt American sleeping patterns immediately, or did tradition linger for multiple generations? As you imagine yourself as a child of newcomers lying between parents who speak softly of a distant homeland, you sense how memory shapes rest. The physical structure of the room may not differ dramatically from others you have known. A bed of rope and ticking, a single table, a stove glowing faintly, yet the stories whispered in the dark carry different geographies. They trace coastlines, mountain villages, crowded ports. You feel how resilience expresses itself through routine. Even in unfamiliar surroundings, families recreate small elements of home. The act of tucking in a child, smoothing a quilt, murmuring a familiar blessing becomes an anchor. Outside, the American night continues as it always has. Crickets sing, wind brushes against brick or timber. Inside, accents soften into sleep. And as you close your eyes within this blend of cultures, you understand that ordinary life in 19th century America was never uniform. It was layered, shaped by migration and memory. Yet across differences in language and custom, one constant remains. Night draws families together beneath shared roofs, where warmth, story, and breath intertwine, until morning light begins its quiet return. As you move further into the century, you cannot ignore that not every family in 19th century America chose where they slept or how their evenings unfolded. For enslaved families in the South, night carried a different weight entirely. Rest existed, but it was shaped by the constraint, surveillance, and exhaustion beyond measure. You imagine stepping into a small cabin on a plantation. The structure may resemble the modest homes you have already known, built of rough timber with a dirt or plank floor. Yet the ownership of that space does not belong to the people who lie within it. A widely documented historical truth confirms that enslaved families were often housed in simple quarters provided by enslavers, frequently overcrowded and lacking adequate insulation. After a day of forced labour in fields or workshops, bodies returned to these cabins utterly spent. Fatigue was immediate and overwhelming. Yet sleep did not always come easily. Anxiety lingered. The possibility of separation through sale hovered constantly. Family members might cling more closely at night, aware that tomorrow offered no guarantees. Scholars continue to examine how enslaved people carved out emotional autonomy within oppressive systems. Even in small cabins with minimal privacy, families created rituals of comfort and resistance. You might hear a soft spiritual sung in low tones. After darkness settles, lyrics coded with hope or quiet defiance. The melody drifts gently through the room, binding hearts even as chains sought to divide them. A firmly established fact is that enslaved individuals often worked from before sunrise until after sunset during peak agricultural seasons. This left little time for extended rest. Some also tended their own small garden plots at night to supplement meagre rations. Sleep, therefore, was compressed into fewer hours than in many free households. You picture someone slipping into bed long after the stars have climbed high, muscles aching deeply. Yet even here, small comforts emerged. An intriguing detail from slave narratives reveals that some families stuffed mattresses with corn shucks or moss, much like poorer free households, but they took pride in arranging bedding neatly and maintaining whatever order they could. A quilt sewn from scraps might hold immense personal meaning. Historians still debate how much privacy enslaved couples were able to maintain, especially when cabins housed multiple individuals. Accounts vary widely depending on region and plantation size. What remains clear is that intimacy persisted despite surveillance. Families found ways to whisper to comfort, to hold one another in the dark. Night also provided rare moments of relative autonomy. While overseers might patrol darkness, offered slight cover for storytelling and quiet community gatherings. Folklore thrived. Tales of clever trickster figures circulated, teaching resilience through metaphor. These stories were not merely entertainment, they were survival tools. You imagine lying on a narrow pallet, listening to elders recount ancestral memories carried from Africa through generations. The cadence of speech shifts slightly, enriched by rhythm and repetition. Children absorb lessons woven carefully into narrative. A recognized historical insight reveals that enslaved families often slept lightly, alert to unexpected intrusion. The knock at a door could signal punishment, sale, or sudden relocation. This constant vigilance shaped the quality of rest profoundly. Sleep was precious yet fragile. Despite these hardships, accounts from formerly enslaved individuals often emphasize the strength of family bonds forged in shared quarters. Researchers continue to explore how such bonds sustained identity under relentless pressure. As you consider this, you sense that closeness at night could serve both as solace and shield. There were also moments of stolen joy, a whispered joke, a quiet laugh muffled beneath a blanket, the gentle rocking of a baby cradled in tired arms. Even within harsh realities, humanity asserted itself. When morning came, it arrived swiftly. Roosters crowed, horns sounded, or overseers called workers back to fields. The cabin emptied quickly, leaving behind rumpled bedding and fading warmth. Yet each night, no matter how constrained the circumstances, families returned to that small shared space. They carried with them stories, songs, and steadfast love that could not be fully controlled. As you imagine resting within such a cabin, you feel both the exhaustion and the quiet courage embedded in each breath. The timber walls may have been simple, the mattress thin, the hours of sleep short, but within that darkness, bonds strengthened through whispered reassurance and shared resilience. In acknowledging these nights, you understand that ordinary life in 19th century America included profound inequality. Sleep itself could be shaped by freedom or by its denial. And as darkness settles once more over the landscape, you reflect on how even in the most restricted conditions, people sought comfort where they could find it. Within narrow cabins and under watchful skies, they closed their eyes, not because the world was gentle, but because the body required rest and the spirit insisted on hope until morning came again. Beyond farms and plantations, beyond towns stitched together by timber and brick, there were other ways of dwelling entirely. Indigenous nations across the continent maintained sleeping traditions shaped by environment, culture, and centuries of lived knowledge. When you shift your gaze toward these communities, you realize how varied 19th century nights truly were. You imagine standing on the Great Plains as dusk settles over open grassland. A circle of teepees rises against the fading light. Inside, one bedding is arranged along the inner walls, raised slightly from the ground, with buffalo hides and woven mats. A well-supported historical understanding confirms that many plains tribes used layered hides for warmth and comfort, carefully prepared to withstand both cold and moisture. You step inside and feel the faint scent of smoke and leather, warm and earthy. In woodland regions, longhouses sheltered extended families beneath one roof. These structures could house multiple generations with separate hearths aligned down the center. Sleep occurred in designated areas along the walls, often elevated on wooden platforms. Researchers continue to explore how these communal arrangements shaped kinship bonds and daily rhythms, noting similarities and differences with European settler households. An intriguing detail from ethnographic accounts reveals that among certain tribes, sleeping positions carried symbolic meaning. Orientation within the dwelling might reflect spiritual beliefs or clan associations. Though practices varied widely across nations, the arrangement of bedding was rarely accidental. You picture yourself lying on a mat of woven reeds, aware that placement connects you to more than mere practicality. A firmly established fact is that many indigenous dwellings were designed with ventilation in mind, allowing smoke from central fires to escape efficiently. This made indoor air somewhat clearer than in some settler cabins. You notice how the opening at the top of a tipi draws smoke upward, leaving the lower space relatively breathable. The crackle of the fire feels steady and contained. Historians still debate the extent to which European contact altered traditional sleeping patterns. Some scholars argue that trade goods such as wool blankets gradually replaced animal hides in many communities. Others emphasize continuity, noting that cultural resilience preserved long-standing customs despite external pressure. As you settle beneath a blanket that blends imported wool with traditional craftsmanship, you sense that adaptation did not erase identity. Children sleep near parents or grandparents wrapped securely against cool night air. Stories are told not only for entertainment, but to pass on moral lessons and cosmological understanding. Oral tradition flows easily in the dark. The rhythm of language carries memory forward generation by generation. In the southwest, adobe homes built by Pueblo peoples offer another contrast. Thick earthen walls hold warmth from the day and release it slowly after sunset. You imagine resting on a simple woven blanket spread across a smooth earthen floor. The air feels steady, insulated from extremes outside. Seasonal movement also shaped sleep. Some tribes migrated according to hunting patterns or agricultural cycles, meaning bedding was portable and easily assembled. You roll a hide or mat knowing it can be carried when the camp shifts. Sleep becomes flexible, responsive to landscape rather than anchored to permanent walls. An additional observation from historical records notes that colonists sometimes misunderstood indigenous sleeping arrangements in interpreting communal spaces through European assumptions. Scholars continue to reassess these interpretations, seeking clearer understanding rooted in indigenous perspectives rather than outsider judgment. As you lie within a circular dwelling, you feel how space here reflects worldview rather than mere convenience. Night sounds differs as well. Instead of creaking timber, you hear wind brushing hide or adobe walls. Instead of distant wagon wheels, perhaps the low murmur of voices from neighbouring dwellings. Stars overhead shine with remarkable clarity in open landscapes far from city light. There were spiritual dimensions to rest in many indigenous cultures. Dreams held significance, sometimes guiding decisions or affirming identity. Elders might interpret vivid dreams with care, weaving them into broader narratives of meaning. Though not uniform across all nations, this respect for dreams appears frequently in accounts preserved from the era. As you imagine drifting to sleep within such a dwelling, you sense both difference and familiarity. The materials change, the arrangement shifts, yet the essential act remains the same. Bodies grow tired, families gather, firelight fades, breath slows. You reflect on how 19th century America encompassed many parallel worlds of night. Settler cabins, plantation quarters, immigrant tenements and indigenous lodges each offered distinct experiences of rest. Yet within each people sought warmth, safety and connection. The air grows cooler. The fire burns low at the centre of the dwelling. You draw a blanket closer and listen to a final story murmured softly in a language older than the nation itself. And as sleep settles gently over you once more, you understand that ordinary life in this century cannot be reduced to a single image. It unfolds across landscapes and cultures, each shaping the way families lie down beneath the stars and rise again with the dawn. When you return to the rhythm of farm life, you feel immediately how labour governs sleep more firmly than any clock. The land does not consult your comfort before demanding effort. It asks for your strength at first light and releases you only when darkness insists. You wake before sunrise, muscles still tender from yesterday's work. A widely recognised historical pattern confirms that in agrarian households throughout the 19th century, daily routines were dictated by seasons and daylight rather than mechanical timepieces. Planting and harvest reshaped sleep itself. During peak periods, rest shrank to what could be managed between chores. You step outside into cool morning air, dew soaking the cuffs of your trousers. The sky glows faintly pink. Animals wait impatiently. Cows must be milked. Chickens fed, horses brushed and harnessed. These tasks occur regardless of how well you slept. Fatigue becomes a familiar companion rather than an exception. Researchers continue to examine how physical labour influenced the quality of rest in pre-industrial communities. Some suggest that intense exertion fostered deeper sleep free from the anxious wakefulness common in modern life. Others note that chronic exhaustion could lead to lingering aches that disrupted comfort at night. As you swing a bucket of water toward the barn, you suspect the truth lies somewhere in between. By midday, your back aches faintly. Hands carry the scent of hay and soil. The sun climbs higher, pressing heat against your shoulders. You glance toward the house, knowing that tonight you will collapse onto the straw mattress without much ceremony. An intriguing detail from farm diaries reveals that during harvest, families sometimes slept in shifts to protect crops from sudden storms or animals. Someone might rise at midnight to check fields lantern in hand, while others snatch brief hours of rest. Sleep becomes segmented by necessity rather than preference. As evening finally approaches, you carry that weight of labour indoors. Supper tastes better after such effort. Simple bread and vegetables somehow look richer for the hunger behind them. Children yawn openly at the table, eyelids drooping long before the final bite. A firmly established fact shows that in rural America, extended daylight during summer months stretched work hours considerably. Artificial lighting was insufficient to continue heavy labour after dark, yet the lingering glow of evening meant tasks extended later than in winter. You feel how the body adjusts, rising earlier and retiring later in response to the sun's path. Historians still debate how much leisure truly existed for ordinary farming families. Some portray evenings as filled with neighbourly visits and storytelling. Others emphasize the relentless nature of agricultural demands, leaving little energy for recreation. As you sit by the hearth rubbing sore shoulders, you realize that leisure likely varied with harvest success, weather and sheer stamina. When you finally lie down, the mattress feels less like a surface and more like a relief. Muscles sink deeply into straw and ticking. The faint rustle beneath you is almost comforting, a reminder that rest has been earned honestly. There were also seasonal extremes that reshaped farm sleep entirely. During lambing or calving season, you might rise repeatedly through the night to assist animals in labour. Lantern light flickers across frost-covered fields as you hurry toward a barn. Scholars continue to explore how such interruptions affected long-term health, though first-hand accounts suggest resilience born of repetition. Back in bed, you stretch, cautiously aware of a tender spot along your spine. The quilt feels heavy but welcome. Outside the fields lie dark and quiet crops resting as you do. The silence carries a sense of shared pause between land and labourer. Children too bear traces of the day's work. Even young ones might have gathered eggs or weeded small garden plots. Their sleep comes swiftly, breaths deep and steady. There is little time for idle wakefulness. An additional observation from agricultural records notes that many farmers track lunar cycles carefully, sometimes aligning certain tasks with phases of the moon. Though not universal, this practice reveals a deep attentiveness to natural rhythms. You glance through the window at a waxing moon, faint and silver, and wonder what tomorrow's light will bring. Night on the farm rarely feels entirely secure. Storm clouds can gather unexpectedly. Livestock may stir restlessly, yet exhaustion wraps around worry, softening its edges. Experts continue to consider whether pre-industrial farm communities experienced less insomnia than later urban populations. The absence of artificial stimulation might suggest so. However, uncertainty about weather crop failure or debt likely weighed heavily on minds even as bodies demanded rest. As you drift towards sleep, you sense both the peace of physical fatigue and the quiet hum of financial concern. Still, when morning arrives, you will rise again. The cycle repeats faithfully season after season. For now, beneath the steady timber beams of your modest home, you allow the day's exertion to settle into your bones. Breath slows, muscles loosen gradually. Outside fields stretch unseen beneath starlight, waiting for tomorrow's labour. And within this pattern of effort and recovery, ordinary families across 19th century America found their rest shaped not by luxury, but by the honest demands of soil, seed and sun. As towns begin to swell and streets lengthen with brick and board, you find yourself stepping into a different kind of night. The farm's wide silence gives way to clustered houses and narrow alleys. Here sleep unfolds amid proximity not just to family, but to strangers, separated by little more than a wall. You climb a short set of stairs to a boarding room rented by the week. The mattress beneath your hand feels familiar in its simplicity, stuffed with straw, or perhaps a thin layer of cotton, if the proprietor has invested in comfort. Yet the space itself feels different. A commonly accepted historical understanding shows that by the mid to late 19th century, boarding houses and rented rooms were widespread in growing cities. Industrialization drew workers from rural areas and overseas, and housing rarely kept pace with demand. You share this floor with several others. Footsteps echo in the hallway. A door closes somewhere down the corridor. Laughter rises briefly from below before fading. Privacy exists in fragments. You close your own door, yet thin plaster allows muffled conversation to drift through. Scholars continue to examine how urban density altered social norms around sleep. Did constant exposure to neighbours erode boundaries, or did it cultivate new forms of courtesy and restraint? As you sit on the edge of your narrow bed listening to a coughing fit from the adjacent room, you sense that adaptation was swift out of necessity. An interesting detail from city life records reveals that some boarding houses enforced strict curfews and lights-out policies. Landladies monitored the hour carefully, seeking to maintain order and respectability. You imagine the soft click of a key turning in a front door lock precisely at 10, signalling that the day is done. A well-documented fact is that urban housing quality varied dramatically. Wealthier families occupied townhouses with multiple floors and designated bedrooms, while labourers crowded into tenements with limited ventilation. In some cases, entire families rented a single room where cooking, washing, and sleeping all occurred within arm's reach. The air could feel heavy, especially in summer, thick with overlapping lives. You lie down and notice how different the night sounds are from rural quiet. Instead of crickets and wind, you hear distant carriage wheels clattering over stone. Perhaps the faint whistle of a late train drifts through the open window. Industry hums even after dark, not loudly but persistently. Historians still debate how significantly factory schedules reshaped sleep cycles. Some argue that rigid shifts imposed earlier and more uniform bedtimes than agricultural life allowed. Others suggest that even in cities, natural light continued to exert strong influence until electric illumination became widespread. As you stare at the ceiling, you feel the tension between mechanical time and human rhythm. In crowded quarters, air quality often suffered. Windows might be small, opened only slightly for fear of drafts or theft. You sense the warmth of the bodies in adjacent rooms, heat accumulating through shared walls. There were also creative adaptations. Some city dwellers placed beds near windows to capture faint breezes. Others rotated sleeping positions among family members to distribute comfort more evenly. These adjustments reveal quiet ingenuity in the face of limitation. Children in urban settings experienced night differently as well. Street noise could linger long past sunset. Vendors calling out final wares, distant music from a tavern, the shuffle of late pedestrians. Sleep arrived gradually layered over persistent background sound. Researchers continue to explore how urbanization influenced mental health and restfulness. Did constant noise elevate stress levels, or did city residents grow accustomed to it quickly? As you listen to a neighbor's muffled conversation fade into silence, you suspect that the human mind adapts remarkably when it must. Boarding houses also fostered unexpected intimacy among unrelated adults. Shared meals in a common dining room led to friendships, arguments, and occasional romances. At night, those connections lingered in the quiet knowledge that someone just beyond the wall might hear you rise or cough. In wealthier urban homes, separation of space became more pronounced as the century advanced. Distinct bedrooms, parlours, and nurseries reflected shifting ideals of privacy and refinement. Yet even in such houses, servants often slept in attic rooms or basement quarters, their rest shaped by proximity to work. As you settle beneath your blanket in this urban room, you feel both anonymity and closeness. You're one among many, yet still enclosed within your own small boundary. The mattress creaks faintly. The building sighs as pipes and beams adjust to cooling air. Outside the city does not fully sleep. A carriage passes. A distant bell tolls the hour. You turn onto your side and let those sounds recede into background hum. Ordinary life here demands adaptation different from the farm, but no less profound. Rest must be carved from noise privacy negotiated across thin walls, and as you finally close your eyes, breathing steady despite the murmuring city beyond you, understand that sleep in 19th century America evolved alongside streets and factories. Yet whether in cabin or boarding room, families and individuals alike sought the same essential refuge beneath quilt and roof, trusting that morning would arrive no matter how crowded the night. On certain evenings, the atmosphere in the room feels subtly different. There is a hint of anticipation in the way glances linger a moment longer than usual, in the careful smoothing of hair before supper, in the quiet straightening of a collar. Courtship in the 19th century unfolds not in private apartments or candlelit restaurants, but within the shared spaces of home. You sit near the hearth, aware that a visitor may soon knock. A widely recognized historical reality is that formal dating as understood today did not become common until the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Earlier in the century, young people typically courted under the supervision of family members, often within the parlour, if one existed, or simply within the main living space. The door opens. A young man removes his hat respectfully. He is invited to sit not far from watchful eyes. Conversation begins politely. Weather harvest prospects, news from town. Yet beneath these topics runs a quiet current of possibility. Scholars continue to explore how structured these interactions truly were. Some accounts suggest strict supervision with parents seated nearby throughout the visit. Others indicate that couples occasionally found brief moments alone, perhaps during a walk to fetch water or a stroll at dusk. As you have observed the exchange unfolding by firelight, you sense that custom and individual temperament shape the balance. An interesting detail from personal misdaters of the period mentions the practice of sitting up where a suitor might remain late into the evening talking with a young woman after the rest of the household had retired. Though not universal, this custom allowed extended conversation under implicit trust. You imagine two figures seated near a dimming hearth, voices low while others pretend to sleep nearby. A firmly established fact is that marriage often carried economic implications alongside affection. Landary labour and family alliances all factored into decisions. Yet within the quiet glow of evening emotions still found space. A shy smile, a shared joke, the brief brushing of hands as a teacup is passed. In homes without separate parlours, the entire household becomes audience and chaperone. Children observe curiously. Parents exchange subtle glances that convey approval or concern. Privacy remains thin, yet intimacy grows through conversation rather than seclusion. Historians still debate how romantic ideals evolved during this century. The rise of sentimental literature may have influenced expectations about love and partnership. At the same time, practical considerations often remained paramount. As you watch the young couple speak softly, you sense both realism and hope in equal measure. Even bedtime is shaped by these visits. If a suitor lingers late, routines adjust slightly. Candles burn longer, the fire is stoked again. Once the guest departs, whispered evaluations ripple gently through the room. Was he earnest? Did she seem pleased? Sleep may be delayed by thoughtful speculation. There were also customs that seemed curious now. In certain regions, a courting couple might sit together, beneath a shared quilt or cloak, a practice sometimes referred to as bundling. This allowed closeness while maintaining clothing and theoretically propriety. Scholars continue to discuss how widespread this tradition truly was and how it functioned in practice. You picture two figures seated modestly side by side, warmth shared without crossing established boundaries. In urban settings, courtship could unfold on front stoops or in public parks, yet, even there, family oversight often lingered. Letters became important tools of affection, read and reread before bed. You might tuck such a letter beneath your pillow, its folded edges softened by handling. A commonly accepted historical insight shows that engagement periods could last months or even years, particularly if financial stability needed to be secured first. During that time, evening visits became regular fixtures woven into household rhythm. As night deepens and conversation fades, the young suitor stands to leave. Farewells are brief but meaningful. The door closes gently and silence returns, though it feels slightly altered. You settle back into bed, replaying the evening's exchanges in your mind. The room that holds labour and illness also holds the fragile beginnings of new households. Soon perhaps another small dwelling will rise nearby, built by hands that tonight clasp shyly across a shared table. In this modest space, romance does not unfold against grand backdrops. It blooms quietly amid everyday life. The same hearth that warms children and cooks supper also witnesses promises and possibilities. As you close your eyes, you reflect on how courtship in 19th century America was shaped by proximity and community. Love, if it grew, did so beneath watchful eyes and within shared walls. And in that closeness, beneath the steady timber beams and fading glow of coals, young hearts learned to navigate affection with patience and respect, carrying their hopes gently into sleep as the house settled once more into its familiar nighttime hush. There are nights when you do not sleep beneath your own roof at all. The familiar creak of your bed is replaced by the uncertain support of a borrowed mattress, or perhaps nothing more than a blanket laid upon open ground. Travel in the 19th century reshapes rest entirely, turning it from routine into improvisation. You picture yourself on a long road, westward wagon wheels grinding slowly over uneven terrain. A widely acknowledged historical reality confirms that many settlers, migrants, and itinerant workers spent weeks or months in transit during this century. For them, sleep was portable, shaped by weather and opportunity rather than architecture. As dusk settles over a dusty trail, you unhitch horses and circle wagons if travelling in a group. Supper is prepared quickly over a small fire. The sky above stretches vast and open, scattered with unfamiliar constellations. Without walls, night feels immense. You lay out a bedroll on the ground, perhaps with a thin mattress of straw gathered nearby. The earth beneath you is firm and cool. Scholars continue to examine how overland journeys affected physical endurance and mental resilience. Some diaries describe deep dreamless sleep born of exhaustion. Others recount restless nights filled with anxiety about weather illness or attack. As you stare upwards at the star-filled sky, you sense both awe and vulnerability. An interesting detail from pioneer accounts reveals that some travellers used saddles as makeshift pillows, propping their heads on curved leather after long days on horseback. It may not sound comfortable, yet necessity rarely consults preference. You adjust your rolled coat beneath your head and accept what the road provides. A firmly established fact shows that inns and taverns dotted many established routes, offering beds to those who could afford them. However, conditions varied widely. Some establishments provided clean linens and hearty meals. Others offered crowded rooms with multiple travellers sharing space. You imagine entering a dim tavern room, greeted by the mingled scents of ale smoke and damp wool. A narrow bed waits in the corner, its mattress thin but blessedly elevated from the ground. Historians still debate how safe such inns truly were. While many served as community hubs, tales of theft and questionable hygiene circulated as well. As you lie in an unfamiliar room listening to strangers snore nearby, you feel how trust becomes a calculated risk. For soldiers during times of conflict, sleep could be even more uncertain. Camp life meant tents pitched in fields, blankets damp with dew by morning. Night watch rotations interrupted rest regularly. Though experiences differed across wars and regions, the disruption of normal sleeping patterns was common. You picture a soldier dozing lightly beside a smouldering campfire, musket within reach. Travel by riverboat offered yet another variation. Passengers might spread bedding on their deck beneath open sky, lulled by the steady churn of paddle wheels. The water's rhythm creates its own lullaby, yet cramped cabins below deck could feel stifling and crowded. Researchers continue to explore how transportation innovations influence rest, suggesting that mobility introduced both opportunity and strain. In urban centres, newly arrived migrants often slept temporarily in warehouses or makeshift shelters before securing permanent lodging. The first nights in a new city could feel disorienting, filled with unfamiliar noises and smells. You lie awake listening to distant bells or factory whistles, uncertain when morning will arrive. Even those travelling for business or family visits face disrupted routines. Without the familiar arrangement of hearth and table, bedtime rituals shifted. Prayer might be whispered quietly beneath a borrowed quilt. Clothing is folded carefully atop a trunk rather than hung on a known peg. An additional observation from travel journals notes that weather often dictated where and how rest occurred. Sudden storms forced hurried sheltering beneath wagon covers. Bitter cold demanded huddling close for warmth. The open road required constant flexibility. Despite these challenges, there were moments of profound beauty. Lying beneath an expansive sky far from town lights, you might feel a sense of freedom impossible within narrow walls. The Milky Way arcs overhead in brilliant clarity. The Earth's scent rises gently around you. Exhaustion eventually softens discomfort. Muscles weary from walking or riding surrender to gravity. Sleep arrives not because conditions are ideal, but because the body insists. Morning on the road comes quickly. The first grey light touches wagon wheels or tent canvas. You rise stiffly, shake dew from your blanket, and prepare to move again. In these transient nights, ordinary families and individuals learned resilience in motion. Home became less about fixed walls and more about shared presence and portable habit. A rolled quilt, a whispered blessing, a careful folding of garments before sleep. And as you imagine yourself drifting off beneath open sky or in a crowded inn, you understand that 19th century rest was not always rooted in place. It travelled with you, carried in memory and routine, offering a small island of familiarity, even as the landscape shifted endlessly around you. When you're finally back beneath your own roof after travel or long days in the fields, you begin to notice the small evening tasks that stand quietly between you and true rest. Sleep does not simply happen. It is prepared for, almost coaxed into place through habit and care. You move through the room with deliberate motions. A broadly accepted historical understanding confirms that in most 19th century households, chores extended right up until bedtime. There were no dishwashers humming quietly in the corner, no thermostats to adjust with a twist of the wrist. Everything required hands. You rinse bowls in a basin of water that has already cooled. The faint metallic scent lingers as you wipe them dry with a cloth. Crumbs are brushed from the table carefully, not wasted, sometimes saved for animals in the morning. A small sweep of the floor gathers stray bits of straw and ash. Cleanliness may not meet modern standards yet. Order matters deeply. Scholars continue to explore how nightly routines contributed to a sense of stability in households that otherwise faced constant uncertainty. Some suggest that repetitive tasks provided psychological grounding. Others argue that they were simply necessary maintenance imbued with meaning only in hindsight. As you shake out a rug near the door, you sense that repetition itself is soothing. An intriguing detail found in domestic manuals of the era describes the importance of airing bedding regularly to prevent dampness and odour. Mattresses might be propped near a window during the day if weather allowed. Quilts were sometimes hung outdoors to catch sunlight. You picture yourself smoothing a blanket flat, satisfied by its fresh scent before folding it back over the bed. A firmly established fact shows that water had to be drawn manually from wells or pumps in most homes. Before retiring, you ensure a full bucket stands ready for morning use. If you forget, dawn will demand extra steps before breakfast can even begin. You lift the bucket slightly to test its weight, listening to the gentle slosh within. Fire requires attention as well. You stir embers thoughtfully, banking them beneath ash. Too much air and they flare unnecessarily. Too little and they die. This quiet tending marks the end of day's activity. Researchers still debate how often families succeeded in preserving coals overnight versus relighting entirely each morning, yet all agree that fire management was a skill learned early. Children are guided through their own small tasks. Shoes are placed near the wall, clothing folded with as much care as their young hands allow. Teeth brushing is rare in comparison to modern practice, though some families use cloth and simple powders. The ritual of preparing the body for rest remains universal even if methods differ. In some regions, an unusual practice involved placing a small bowl of salt near the door at night, believed by certain communities to deter negative forces. While not widespread, such customs reflect the blending of practical and symbolic protection. You glance at the doorway content with the sturdy latch and perhaps a quiet hope for unseen guardians as well. A recognised historical insight reveals that many households kept chamber pots near beds to avoid venturing outside after dark. Before sleeping, you ensure it is placed discreetly and emptied regularly. The arrangement may lack elegance, yet it spares cold midnight walks. Historians still debate how much of these routines were driven by strict social expectation versus simple necessity. Did families feel moral obligation to maintain order before sleep, or was it purely pragmatic? As you wipe your hands on a cloth and survey the tidy room, you feel a small swell of satisfaction that transcends explanation. You check the door once more, pressing gently to confirm it holds firm. Windows are secured against wind or unexpected rain. The room feels contained, prepared. A candle is snuffed carefully, smoke curling upward in a thin grey ribbon. Darkness deepens gradually rather than abruptly. Without artificial glare, the transition into night feels natural, almost organic. You pause briefly before climbing into bed, taking in the quiet result of your labour. The table stands cleared, the hearth glows softly, bedding lies smooth and inviting. Experts who study domestic life often emphasise that these small nightly tasks sustained households through decades of change. Industrialisation, migration and conflict reshaped the nation, yet within homes sweeping floors and banking fires continued steadily. As you slip beneath the quilt, you sense how continuity provides comfort. The mattress rustles beneath you. Your muscles relax incrementally. Around you, the room rests in gentle order, ready for whatever morning brings. In this careful preparation, ordinary families of 19th century America transformed simple spaces into sanctuaries, not through luxury or abundance, but through attention. And as your breathing slows and the last faint glow of embers dims, you realize that sleep is not only a biological necessity. It is the quiet reward at the end of countless small mindful acts that carry a household from one day into the next. As the century advances and towns swell into true cities, you begin to notice a subtle shift in the very sound of night. The quiet once governed by crickets and wind now carries a faint mechanical undertone. Industry does not fully sleep, and gradually neither do you. You lie in bed and listen carefully. Beyond the thin wall, a distant rumble rolls across cobblestone streets. A factory whistle pierces the dark at an unexpected hour. A firmly grounded historical observation confirms that by the mid to late 19th century, industrialization had begun reshaping daily schedules for many urban families. Textile mills, rail yards, and foundries operated according to strict timetables, sometimes extending work into early morning or late evening hours. Your own sleep begins to bend around these new rhythms. If you work an early shift, you must rise before dawn regardless of season. The sun no longer dictates your waking. A clock on the mantel, once a luxury, now becomes essential. Its steady ticking fills the room, a mechanical heartbeat marking the hours with indifferent precision. Scholars continue to explore how factory labour altered patterns of rest compared to agrarian life. Some argue that industrial schedules impose greater regularity, enforcing consistent bedtimes and wake times. Others suggest that long shifts and unpredictable overtime disrupted natural cycles profoundly. As you turn onto your side, listening to that distant whistle, you feel the tension between discipline and fatigue. An intriguing detail from factory town records reveals that some mills employed night shifts, especially as gas lighting improved. Workers rotated through dark hours, sleeping during daylight instead. You imagine returning home at sunrise, drawing curtains tight to block out brightness, while the rest of the city stirs awake. Your bed feels unfamiliar in morning light, shadows reversed. A widely accepted historical fact is that railroads expanded dramatically during this era, connecting regions with unprecedented speed. Trains ran through towns at all hours, their whistles echoing across neighbourhoods. Even those not employed by the railway heard its presence nightly. You lie still as a train passes somewhere beyond sight, its rumble fading slowly into distance. Historians still debate whether industrialisation initially improved or worsened overall quality of life for working families. Increased wages brought certain advantages, yet crowded housing and long hours strained bodies and minds. As you rub tired eyes in the half-dark, you suspect that progress often arrives with mixed consequences. In mill towns, entire communities synchronized to factory bells. The sound signaling start and end of shifts carried into bedrooms, waking children and elders alike. Sleep became communal, not just within one household, but across entire neighborhoods. There were also attempts to adapt. Some families invested in heavier curtains to block streetlight glare from newly installed gas lamps. Others rearranged furniture to place beds farther from windows facing busy roads. These small adjustments reflect resilience in the face of change. A curious practice noted in urban newspapers described workers taking brief naps during midday breaks to compensate for early starts. Though not universal, such habits reveal efforts to reclaim rest within rigid schedules. You picture someone sitting upright on a wooden bench, head tilted forward, catching precious minutes of sleep between whistles. In wealthier homes, gas lighting extended social evenings. Dinners lasted longer. Reading continued well past sunset. While this offered intellectual enrichment, it also delayed bedtime. Researchers continue to examine how artificial illumination gradually stretched waking hours across classes. As you lie in your modest room, you feel how sound itself has changed. Instead of pure silence after dark, there is a low hum that never quite disappears. Wheels turning somewhere. Steam releasing with a sharp hiss. The city breathes mechanically. Yet within your walls you still bank the fire, smooth the quilt and whisper goodnight to those nearby. Industrial noise may press at the edges, but domestic ritual persists. You consider how future generations might look back on this era as the moment when sleep began to detach from sunlight entirely. For now, though, you simply adjust. You close your eyes and allow fatigue to override the distant clang of a metal. Morning will come, whether summoned by rooster or whistle. You will rise accordingly, following the schedule that work demands. And as you drift toward rest beneath the steady tick of the clock, you understand that 19th century nights are no longer uniform. They hum with engines and ambition. Yet even amid progress and pressure, ordinary families continue seeking the same refuge they always have, a few quiet hours beneath blankets before the next summons to labour begins. Light itself begins to change the character of your evenings. Where once you relied almost entirely on firelight and a single candle, new forms of illumination gradually slip into ordinary homes. The darkness no longer falls as completely as it once did. You sit at the table and trim the wick of a lamp filled with kerosene. A well-established historical development shows that by the mid-19th century, kerosene lamps had become more affordable and widespread, offering brighter and steadier light than tallow candles. When you strike a match and lower it carefully to the wick, the flame rises clear and strong, the room brightens noticeably. The light feels different, less flickering, more confident. Shadows retreat further into corners. You can see the stitching on a shirt more clearly. A book's printed words appear sharper. Evening tasks stretch slightly longer because visibility allows them to. Scholars continue to examine how extended illumination influenced daily schedules. Some suggest that brighter lighting encouraged longer periods of productivity and leisure. Others propose that while light improved comfort, economic necessity still limited how late families remained awake. As you glance at the clock, you realize that light offers possibility, not obligation. An interesting detail from household accounts notes that early kerosene sometimes carried a strong odor if poorly refined. Families quickly learned to adjust wicks carefully to avoid smoke and soot. You notice the faint scent of oil as the lamp burns steadily, its glass chimney warming to the touch. A widely acknowledged historical reality is that gas lighting appeared in larger cities before spreading more broadly. Street lamps transformed urban nights, making streets safer and more navigable after dark. For those living near newly lit avenues, the glow filtered through curtains, faintly altering the texture of sleep. You lie in bed and see a pale wash of light across the ceiling, where once there was complete blackness. Historians still debate whether artificial lighting contributed to gradual shifts in sleep duration. Did people begin retiring later as nights grew brighter, or did ingrained habits persist for decades? As you continue mending a shirt by steady lamp glow, you sense how tempting it is to prolong activity just a little longer. In rural areas, oil lamps become treasured possessions. Glass chimneys are handled with care, cleaned regularly to maintain clarity. Breaking one can mean weeks without proper light. You shield the flame from drafts, aware of its fragility despite its brilliance. There were also safety concerns. Accidental fires from overturned lamps were not uncommon. Families placed lamps on stable surfaces and extinguished them before bed with deliberate attention. The brightness they offered came with responsibility. An unusual practice observed in some communities involved placing mirrors strategically to reflect lamplight deeper into a room. This simple technique amplified illumination without additional fuel. You imagine adjusting a small mirror on the wall, watching the flame multiply softly in reflection. As light improves, evening activities subtly expand. Reading aloud becomes easier. Sewing continues without strain. Children might study lessons a bit later than before, yet fatigue remains real. Physical labour still shapes the body's limits. A firmly supported historical insight reveals that electric lighting began appearing in certain urban centres toward the very end of the century. Though rare in ordinary homes at first, its arrival hinted at even greater transformation ahead. You may hear distant rumours of entire streets glowing without flame powered by unseen currents. For now, though, your kerosene lamp stands as a small beacon. It pushes back darkness just enough to extend conversation and work by a modest margin. When you finally extinguish it, the room does not plunge instantly into deep black. A faint after-image lingers behind your eyelids. Researchers continue to explore how improved lighting intersected with broader social change from literacy to leisure. Yet within your home, the shift feels personal rather than abstract. It means you can see your child's face clearly while telling a story. It means you can finish a seam that once would have waited until morning. At last, you turn the small knob to lower the wick. The flame shrinks, trembles, and disappears with a soft curl of smoke. Darkness returns, though it feels slightly different now, as if it knows it can be banished more easily than before. You slide beneath the quilt and close your eyes. The memory of brightness lingers, but sleep arrives just as it always has, drawn by fatigue and routine, rather than by the presence or absence of flame. In this evolving century, light stretches evening gently, yet it does not erase the body's need for rest. Ordinary families continue to navigate the balance between innovation and habit, allowing new lamps to brighten their nights without entirely surrendering to endless wakefulness. And so you drift off once more, aware that even as technology advances, the simple act of closing your eyes remains unchanged. As darkness settles and lamps are lowered, your mind often lingers in that quiet borderland between waking and sleep. In the 19th century, dreams were not dismissed as meaningless flickers of the brain. They were discussed, pondered, sometimes even trusted. Night invited interpretation. You lie still, listening to the steady breathing of those around you, and you allow your thoughts to drift. A widely recognized historical pattern shows that many Americans of this era viewed dreams through spiritual or moral lenses. Religious communities sometimes considered vivid dreams as potential messages, while others regarded them as reflections of daily life shaped by conscience and memory. In the morning, if a dream felt particularly striking, you might recount it at breakfast. A child who dreamed of falling might be teased gently or reassured. An adult who dreamed of a lost relative might pause thoughtfully before speaking. Conversation about dreams blended curiosity with caution. Scholars continue to examine how seriously ordinary families interpreted such nighttime visions. Some argue that dream interpretation manuals were surprisingly popular in certain decades, offering symbolic explanations for common imagery. Others suggest that while such books existed, most families treated dreams more casually. As you replay fragments of a dream in your mind, you sense how meaning often depends on mood as much as belief. An intriguing detail from period newspapers reveals advertisements for small pamphlets promising to decode dreams into numbers for lotteries or omens for fortune. Though not universally embraced, these publications hint at the blend of superstition and practicality that characterized the age. You smile faintly at the thought of someone scanning a booklet by lamplight seeking insight from a night vision about a horse or a river. A firmly grounded historical insight confirms that spiritualism gained traction in the mid-19th century, particularly after the rise of seance culture. Some families attended gatherings where mediums claimed to communicate with the departed. For those influenced by such movements, dreams sometimes felt like bridges between worlds. You imagine lying awake after such a meeting, wondering whether a familiar face in a dream carried deeper significance. Historians still debate how widespread belief in supernatural interpretations truly was compared to quieter private reflection. Letters from the era reveal a spectrum of responses from skeptical dismissal to heartfelt conviction. As you drift towards sleep, you sense that uncertainty itself adds texture to the night. Children often carried their own nighttime fears. A shadow cast by the hearth might seem larger than reason allows. You reassure them, gently explaining the ordinary source of creaking beams or flickering light. In doing so, you teach them to distinguish imagination from reality, even as you privately hold space for mystery. A commonly accepted historical fact is that bedtime stories frequently included moral lessons or cautionary elements. Tales of wandering spirits or clever tricksters serve both to entertain and instruct. These narratives shape the imagery that later surfaced in dreams. You picture a child dreaming of a fox outwitted by a humble farmer, the story replaying in soft symbolic form. In certain communities, objects were believed to influence dreams. A sprig of lavender tucked beneath a pillow might be said to encourage pleasant sleep. A small charm hung near the bed could ward off troubling visions. Researchers continue to explore how such practices blended herbal knowledge with folklore. You inhale faintly, catching the scent of dried herbs stored nearby. The quality of dreams could also reflect daily labor. After long hours in the field, you might dream of endless rows of corn stretching beneath a relentless sun. After a tense conversation with a neighbor, you may find yourself reliving it in exaggerated form during the night. The mind works quietly while the body rests. Scholars still debate how much segmented sleep patterns influence dream recall. If you wake briefly in the middle of the night before drifting back to sleep, you may remember dreams more vividly. As you stir once and adjust your blanket, fragments of imagery hover just beyond clarity. Morning light often dissolves the intensity of nighttime visions. What felt profound in darkness may seem ordinary by dawn, yet occasionally a dream lingers, shaping mood throughout the day. In these shared sleeping quarters, dreams are rarely entirely private. A murmur or sudden movement can prompt a whispered question. Did you dream? Are you all right? Night becomes a shared landscape, not only of breath, but of imagination. As you finally surrender to deeper rest, you recognize the 19th century held room for both rational thought and lingering superstition. Science advanced steadily, yet mystery retained its quiet hold. And within that gentle ambiguity, ordinary families closed their eyes each night, uncertain what images might rise behind them. Some dreams would be forgotten. Others would be remembered over morning bread. For now, the room settles into silence once more. Breath deepens, shadows soften, and your own dreams begin to form, shaped by firelight, fieldwork, whispered prayers, and the vast unfolding story of a century still discovering itself beneath the quiet shelter of night. As decades pass, you begin to notice small refinements creeping gently into ordinary homes. Nothing dramatic at first, just subtle improvements in the objects that cradle you at night. Comfort evolves quietly, stitch by stitch, board by board. A well-documented historical development shows that by the latter half of the 19th century, mass production and expanding rail networks made manufactured furniture more accessible to middle and even some working-class families. Bed frames once crafted entirely by hand could now be purchased from catalogues or local merchants. You run your hand along a smoother headboard than the rough plank you remember from childhood. The mattress beneath you feels slightly different too. While straw and corn husks remain common cotton batting, and even early spring mattresses begin to appear in certain households. Researchers continue to explore how quickly these innovations spread beyond cities into rural communities. Some suggest that comfort improved gradually but unevenly, influenced by transportation routes and disposable income. You shift your weight and notice less sag in the center. Perhaps the rope beneath has been replaced by wooden slats. Perhaps the stuffing has been refreshed more regularly. These are modest changes, yet your back feels the difference. An intriguing detail from furniture advertisements of the era reveals enthusiastic claims about the health benefits of improved bedding. Merchants promised better posture, deeper sleep, and enhanced vitality. Though such marketing may have exaggerated results, it reflects growing awareness that rest influenced well-being. You imagine a printed broadside boasting of miraculous springs hidden within a mattress, transforming the ordinary into the aspirational. A broadly recognized fact is that textile production expanded significantly during this period. Factory-woven fabrics became more affordable, allowing families to purchase patterned quilts and sturdier sheets. You trace the fine weave of a new coverlet, noticing how it feels smoother against your skin than older homespun cloth. Historians still debate how much these material improvements altered daily life versus simply adding aesthetic variety. Did a softer mattress truly change the depth of sleep, or did labor and stress continue to dictate rest more strongly? As you settle beneath a newer quilt, you suspect that comfort accumulates quietly, even if it does not transform everything at once. Curtains, too, become more common as fabric grows affordable. You draw them closed at May, blocking streetlight or moonlight with greater ease. The room feels more enclosed, more intentionally private. There were also innovations in bedsteads themselves. Iron frames began to replace wooden ones in some urban homes. They were touted as more hygienic, less hospitable to pests. Scholars continue to examine how awareness of cleanliness and disease influenced such shifts. You imagine the cool feel of iron beneath your hand, sturdy and resistant to rot. A curious custom observed in some households involved carefully arranging decorative pillows during the day, even if they were tossed aside at night. The bed became not only a place of rest, but a symbol of order and pride. You smooth the coverlet flat before retiring, appreciating its neat appearance even in dim light. Rugs woven in factories soften wooden floors, reducing drafts and noise. You step onto one before climbing into bed, grateful for the slight insulation it provides. These details accumulate, shaping the sensory texture of evening. At the same time, many families still rely on older methods. Not every household embraces or can afford new furnishings. Rural isolation or limited income may delay adoption for years. Experts continue to assess the uneven distribution of material progress across regions and classes. As you consider neighbours with simpler arrangements, you recognise that change rarely moves uniformly. Even the presence of a small bedside table feels like an advance. A place to set a lamp securely, a drawer to hold letters or spectacles. These additions offer convenience once unimaginable in one-room cabins. Children too benefit from incremental improvement. A slightly larger bed, a warmer blanket purchased from a travelling salesman. Their sleep grows marginally more comfortable, though still shaped by shared space. As you lie down tonight, the mattress supports you with greater steadiness than in years past. The quilt lies smooth and even. Curtains muffle the faint glow from outside. You reflect on how domestic life in 19th century America did not remain static. While many routines endured, material conditions shifted gradually through innovation and commerce. Scholars continue to discuss whether these advancements represented genuine improvement or merely signaled deeper social change tied to industrial growth. For you, the answer feels simple. Your shoulders ache a little less. Your rest comes a touch easier. The room remains modest, the walls still timber or brick, yet beneath your back lies subtle progress. It does not erase hardship or guarantee peace, but it softens the edge of fatigue. As you close your eyes, you sense how comfort in this century accumulates patiently. Each improvement small, each change incremental. And within that slow evolution, ordinary families continue to shape their nights, weaving innovation gently into tradition as they drift once more into sleep. Not every night unfolds gently. There are evenings when the air itself feels unsettled, when the sky carries a strange tint at sunset, and birds fall quiet too early. In the 19th century, without modern forecasting, weather arrives as both spectacle and threat. Sleep on such nights becomes fragile. You lie in bed listening to wind gather strength. A widely acknowledged historical reality is that storms, fires, and natural disasters pose some constant risks to homes built of wood thatch or early brick. Lightning could strike without warning. A spark from a chimney might ignite a roof. Families understood that safety was never absolute. The first low rumble of thunder rolls across the distance. The sound vibrates through beams and floorboards. You sit upright instinctively, counting the seconds between flash and crash, though such calculations are more intuition than science. Rain begins in hesitant drops, then intensifies, drumming hard against shingles. Scholars continue to examine how communities prepared for severe weather before formal meteorological systems existed. Some relied on almanacs that offered seasonal predictions. Others trusted personal observation of cloud formations or animal behavior. As you listen to wind rattle the shutters, you wonder whether earlier signs were missed or simply unavoidable. An intriguing detail from rural accounts reveals that some families kept valuables bundled near the door during storm season, ready to grab if evacuation became necessary. A small box of letters, a family Bible, perhaps a few coins saved carefully. You glance toward your own modest belongings and consider what you would reach for first. A firmly established fact shows that house fires were a leading cause of destruction in 19th century towns, with open flames used for light and heat accidents were common. When wind howls and sparks leap from the hearth, vigilance sharpens. You rise briefly to check for embers are contained, heart beating slightly faster than usual. Historians still debate how frequently entire communities were reshaped by catastrophic events versus isolated incidents. Newspaper reports often highlighted dramatic losses, yet many families endured smaller repeated damages that rarely entered official record. As rain pounds harder against the roof, you feel how even minor leaks can disrupt sleep profoundly. The room darkens further as clouds swallow moonlight. Lightning flashes, suddenly illuminating every corner in stark white before plunging the space back into shadow. Children stir uneasily. One calls out softly. You reassure them in a calm voice, though your own pulse remains elevated. There were also regional hazards beyond storms. In certain areas, earthquakes or river floods threatened unexpectedly. Along western plains, prairie fires could spread, swiftly driven by dry winds. Scholars continue to assess how such risks shaped settlement patterns and architectural choices. You hear a branch snap outside, thudding against the wall. The sound startles you despite reason. Your mind races briefly through possibilities before settling again. Wind not intruder. Nature not malice. In towns, fires could spread block by block with devastating speed. Bucket brigades formed quickly when bells rang through streets at night. You imagine waking to frantic shouts rushing outside with neighbours, passing water hand to hand under flickering orange light. A curious practice in some households involved storing ladders strategically for roof access in case sparks needed to be extinguished. Practical foresight shaped nightly peace of mind. You picture such a ladder leaning quietly beside the house, rarely used but reassuring in presence. Gradually the storm begins to move on. Thunder grows more distant. Rain softens from pounding to steady whisper. Your breathing slows accordingly. Exhaustion eventually outweighs adrenaline. You return fully to bed, pulling the quilt closer as cool air drifts through newly damp cracks. The scent of wet earth fills the room faintly. Experts continue to examine how repeated exposure to natural hazards influenced emotional resilience in 19th century communities. Did constant risk foster courage, or did it cultivate quiet anxiety that lingered beneath daily life? As you settle, again into straw and fabric, you sense that both responses likely coexisted. Morning will reveal the outcome. A few shingles displaced perhaps, a fence leaning, or perhaps only puddles glistening beneath pale light. For now, the storm recedes into memory, even as its echo lingers in your nerves. The house stands firm, the family rests once more, and as sleep gradually reclaims you, you recognize that ordinary life in this century required acceptance of forces beyond human control. Within timber walls and beneath shifting skies, families lay down each night aware that safety was provisional. Yet they closed their eyes anyway, trusting in shelter, vigilance, and one another, until the next dawn broke across a sometimes altered landscape. There are nights when the comfort of your own household extends beyond its walls. In a century where distance could be vast and communication slow, neighbours were not simply acquaintances. They were a living safety net woven quietly through shared evenings and sudden midnight knocks. You lie in bed when a soft rap sounds at the door. It is not urgent, but it carries weight. A widely recognised historical pattern shows that 19th century communities, especially in rural areas, relied heavily on mutual aid. Without rapid transportation or centralised emergency services, assistance came from those within walking distance. You rise drawing a shawl over your shoulders and lift the latch. A neighbour stands in the dim light, hat in hand. Perhaps a cow is calving unexpectedly. Perhaps a child has taken ill. Requests for help rarely waited for daylight. You nod and step outside into cool night air, boots crunching softly on gravel. Scholars continue to explore how such reciprocal relationships shape social cohesion. Some argue that reliance on neighbours strengthened bonds deeply. Others note that expectations of constant availability could strain households already burdened by labour. As you walk alongside your neighbour beneath starlight, you sense both generosity and obligation intertwined. An intriguing detail from rural memoirs describes the practice of quilting bees and barn raisings that sometimes extended late into the night. After work was done, families lingered, talking and laughing long past usual bedtimes. Though primarily social events, they reinforced networks of support that later proved vital in crisis. You imagine returning home from such a gathering with tired feet and a full heart. A firmly established fact reveals that in many communities midwives were summoned at all hours when labour began. Birth did not consult convenience. You picture a lantern bobbing through darkness as someone hurries toward a small cabin where a family waits anxiously. Inside, other children may sleep lightly aware that something important is unfolding. Historians still debate how much communal living fostered harmony versus conflict. Shared wells, shared fences, shared pastures could generate disputes as easily as cooperation. Yet when night brought urgent need, differences often receded temporarily. You return home later than expected, fatigue pressing at your temples. The room feels warmer now, embers revived slightly to welcome you back. Your family stirs briefly as you slide beneath the quilt again. In towns, community life expressed itself differently, but no less powerfully. Fire alarms summoned entire neighbourhoods to action. Church bells tolled not only for worship but for warning. Sleep might be interrupted by collective response rather than solitary alarm. A curious custom observed in some settlements involved neighbours rotating overnight watch duties during times of heightened concern, such as after rumours of theft or unrest. Though not universal, this practice reflects shared vigilance. You imagine taking a turn walking slowly along a quiet street lantern, casting soft pools of light at your feet. A commonly accepted historical insight confirms that social visits often extended into evening hours, especially in winter when travel by daylight was limited. A knock at the door might signal nothing more than companionship. Stories were exchanged, news shared, laughter offered freely. Bedtime adjusted accordingly. Researchers continues to examine how community interaction influenced mental well-being. In eras without modern entertainment, human presence filled evenings richly. As you reflect beneath your blanket, you feel how knowing your neighbours by name provides subtle reassurance. The boundary between private and communal life remains porous. A cry for help carries across fields easily. A lantern in a window signals readiness to receive a guest. Even simple gestures matter. Lending a quilt to a family facing sudden hardship. Bringing broth to someone recovering from illness. These acts ripple gently through the fabric of nightly existence. As you settle once more into steady breathing, you consider how sleep in 19th century America was rarely an entirely solitary experience. Beyond your walls, others rest within similar timber frames listening to similar winds. The sense of belonging extends outward like concentric circles in a pond. Your own rest feels safer knowing that watchful eyes exist nearby ready to answer a call if needed. And as darkness deepens and the last distant lantern dims, you surrender again to sleep with the quiet understanding that ordinary life here is sustained not only by individual effort, but by shared presence. In the stillness of night, community breathes alongside you unseen yet steadfast until morning. Light gently gathers everyone back into motion once more. As the century unfolds, you begin to notice how expectations within the household quietly shift. Who rises first? Who remains awake the longest? Who tends the sick child at midnight? Gender roles shape the rhythm of night as surely as daylight labour does. You lie in bed and listen to the soft stirrings of the room. A widely acknowledged historical reality shows that 19th century American society generally operated within clearly defined roles for men and women, particularly in domestic settings. Men were often associated with external labour and financial provision, while women managed household duties, including much of the invisible work that surrounded sleep itself. You think of the countless small acts performed before rest, quilts shaken and smoothed, water drawn and placed within reach, children coaxed gently into bed. These tasks frequently fell to women's hands. Scholars continue to examine how domestic labour, though unpaid, structured family life profoundly. As you watch a mother adjust a blanket one final time before lying down herself, you see how care extends even into exhaustion. An intriguing detail from diaries of the period reveals that some women rose quietly after others had fallen asleep to finish mending or prepare bread for morning baking. The room glowed faintly with lamplight while the rest of the household breathed steadily. Sleep for them often arrived last. A firmly established fact confirms that childbirth and infant care dramatically shaped women's rest. Frequent nighttime feedings and recovery from labour meant that uninterrupted sleep could be rare. Historians still debate how women balance these demands with other domestic responsibilities given limited external support in many households. As you imagine rising repeatedly to soothe a ever-crying baby, you sense how deeply endurance was woven into nightly routine. Men's sleep too carried expectation. Early rising for work required discipline. In some communities, a man who lingered too long in bed might be viewed as lacking industriousness. You picture a father slipping quietly from beneath the quilt before dawn, careful not to wake children stepping into boots already waiting near the door. Yet roles were not entirely rigid. Illness, widowhood, or migration could alter responsibilities quickly. Scholars continue to explore how necessity sometimes reshaped expectations, compelling men to perform traditionally feminine tasks and vice versa. In such moments, survival outweighed convention. In urban settings, women who worked in factories or as domestic servants faced their own unique sleep patterns. Long hours away from home left limited time for rest or personal reflection. Boarding house rooms might serve as both refuge and reminder of independence. A curious practice noted in some households involved mothers teaching daughters specific bedtime rituals as preparation for future marriage, folding quilts properly, banking fires correctly, ensuring doors were secured. These lessons passed quietly from generation to generation, shaping how future homes would function at night. Children absorbed these patterns early. Boys might accompany fathers on pre-dawn chores. Girls might assist mothers in tidying before bed. Though not universal across all families, such divisions were common enough to influence daily rhythm widely. Historians still debate how much of this structure was internalized willingly versus imposed by social pressure. Letters from women reveal pride in well-kept homes alongside fatigue from unending responsibility. As you lie awake briefly, you sense the layered complexity behind simple nightly scenes. There were also moments of shared reprieve. A husband might take over soothing a restless child so his wife could sleep. A daughter might insist her mother rest while she completed remaining tasks. These gestures reveal flexibility within broader expectation. As the century neared its end, conversations about women's roles began to shift publicly. Reform movements and increased educational opportunities gradually influenced domestic dynamics, yet within many homes, nightly routines changed, slowly shaped more by habit than by ideology. You feel how rest itself reflects social structure. Who sleeps deeply? Who wakes at every small sound? Who feels free to drift fully into dreams and who remains lightly alert? The room grows quiet again, breath deepens. Even within established roles, fatigue eventually claims everyone equally. And as you close your eyes, you reflect that ordinary life in 19th century America was not only shaped by walls and weather, but by expectations woven into daily practice. Sleep became both necessity and mirror, reflecting the responsibilities carried quietly by each member of the household. In that shared darkness beneath the quilts smoothed by careful hands, you sense both the weight and the tenderness of these roles. And though morning will once again divide tasks along familiar lines, for now, the entire room rests together, united in the simple act of surrendering to night. As the 19th century draws toward its final decades, you begin to sense that something subtle yet undeniable is shifting within the walls around you. The room may look similar at first glance, but small conveniences quietly accumulate as smoothing the edges of nightly life. A firmly grounded historical development reveals that by the late 1800s, indoor plumbing began appearing in more affluent urban homes, though it remained out of reach for many rural families. The idea of water flowing directly inside the house without a trip to the well would have seemed astonishing only a generation earlier. You imagine turning a simple handle and hearing water respond obediently, eliminating the heavy bucket beside the hearth. Researchers continue to explore how such advancements altered perceptions of comfort and privacy. Did access to indoor wash basins change bedtime routines significantly, or did habit keep practices largely the same? As you wash your hands in a small basin set neatly on a stand rather than at a communal pump outside, you sense how even minor shifts feel transformative. An intriguing detail from late-century catalogues shows the rise of mail-order purchasing. Companies like Sears allowed families in remote areas to order furniture, bedding, and even prefabricated home kits. Though not every household participated immediately, the possibility itself widened horizons. You picture flipping through a thick catalogue by lamplight, tracing illustrations of brass bedsteads and patterned quilts with quiet fascination. A broadly recognized historical fact confirms that by the 1890s electric lighting began spreading more widely in major cities, though rural electrification would not arrive until much later. For those who experienced it, the difference between flame and filament felt profound. The steady white glow banished shadows more thoroughly than any oil lamp. You lie in bed aware that darkness now feels chosen rather than absolute. Historians still debate how quickly electric light reshaped sleep duration. Some suggest that extended illumination encouraged later bedtimes and more varied evening activities. Others caution that economic realities limited widespread change at first. As you lower a switch and watch the room fall into darkness instantly, you sense that control over light subtly redefines control over time. Heating too evolves. Coal-burning stoves become more efficient in certain regions, distributing warmth more evenly than open hearths. You feel the difference when cold wind presses against the house, but the interior remains steady and temperate. Nights feel less precarious, less dependent on carefully banked embers. A curious trend emerging in urban areas involves decorative bedroom sets, matching dressers and bedsteads designed for aesthetic harmony. Bedrooms begin to separate more distinctly from communal living areas. Though this arrangement remains a luxury for many, it signals shifting ideals about privacy and personal space. You imagine closing a bedroom door fully, the quiet inside belonging solely to you. Scholars continue to examine how these architectural and technological changes influenced family dynamics. Did separate bedrooms encourage individuality, or did they dilute the intimacy once fostered by shared quarters? As you consider a child sleeping alone for the first time in a small adjacent room, you feel both pride and a faint ache of distance. Mattresses improve further with the development of coil springs and standardized manufacturing. The sensation of lying down changes gradually. Instead of sagging rope and uneven straw, there is firmer support beneath your spine. Though still far from modern luxury, the incremental progress accumulates meaningfully. A commonly accepted historical observation notes that hygiene awareness increased during this period, influenced by advancing medical knowledge. Cleaner bedding, more frequent laundering, and attention to ventilation became markers of responsible housekeeping. You open a window briefly before bed, letting fresh air circulate intentionally rather than incidentally. Yet not all families experience these changes equally. Rural isolation, economic hardship, and cultural preference preserve older methods well into the next century. Experts continue to analyze the uneven distribution of progress across regions and social classes. As you settle beneath your quilt, you recognize that innovation arrives like a tide touching some shores sooner than others. Even the simple act of setting an alarm clock beside your bed signals transformation. Instead of relying solely on roosters or factory whistles, you control your waking moment precisely. The small ticking device rests on a bedside table, a quiet guardian of morning obligations. As night deepens, you reflect on how far ordinary domestic life has travelled within a single century. From rough log cabins lit by tallow candles to brick homes warmed by coal stoves and illuminated by electric bulbs, the arc of change curves steadily forward. And yet, when you finally close your eyes, the essential experience remains strikingly familiar. Breath slows, muscles loosen, dreams gather softly. Progress reshapes the container of sleep, but not its core. Beneath new lights and improved mattresses, ordinary families continue to surrender to the same ancient rhythm. The century may be ending, but night still invites you gently into rest, just as it did for your grandparents when timber walls first rose against an uncertain horizon. As you grow older within these shifting decades, night begins to feel different in ways that have little to do with furniture or lighting. The body carries memory in its bones. The same bed that once welcomed you after long days of labour now receives you more gently, almost cautiously. You lie on your back and listen to the room. The sounds are familiar. The faint settling of beams, the quiet breath of those beside you. Yet your own breathing has changed slightly over the years, slower, perhaps occasionally interrupted by a thoughtful pause. A widely recognised historical reality shows that life expectancy in the 19th century was lower than today, though those who survived childhood often lived into their 60s or beyond. Aging within modest homes meant adapting nightly habits gradually. Researchers continued to explore how older adults in earlier centuries experienced sleep compared to younger family members. Without modern medicine to ease chronic pain, aches could linger stubbornly through the night. You shift, carefully adjusting the pillow beneath your head. The mattress that once seemed firm now feels both supportive and slightly unforgiving. An intriguing detail from letters of elderly Americans reveals that some preferred rising before dawn, not out of necessity but because sleep no longer came as deeply. Early morning hours became a time for reflection prayer or quiet work by lamplight. You imagine sitting at the small table while others remain asleep, listening to the steady ticking of a clock marking time that feels increasingly precious. A firmly established fact confirms that multi-generational households were common in many communities. Aging parents often remained under the same roof as adult children. This arrangement altered sleeping spaces once more. A bed near the hearth might be reserved for an elder who required extra warmth. Scholars still debate how such proximity influenced intergenerational understanding, whether it fostered empathy or quiet tension. As you lie nearby, you sense how the presence of elders anchors the household in shared history. Memories surface easily in darkness. You recall nights spent on straw pallets in youth, the raw scent of new-cut logs in a freshly built cabin. You remember storms that rattled thinner walls, courtship conversations whispered by dying embers, the first cry of a newborn echoing in the same room where you now rest. There is also awareness of loss. In a century marked by disease and hardship, many families experienced bereavement. You may find yourself staring into darkness, recalling faces no longer present in the room. Historians continue to examine how grief was expressed privately within homes compared to public mourning rituals. As you close your eyes briefly, you sense how absence can feel as tangible as presence at night. A curious habit observed in some older individuals involved keeping a small object near the bed as comfort. Perhaps a pocket watch that once belonged to a parent, a folded letter tied with ribbon. These tokens bridged past and present quietly. You reach toward the bedside table and touch a familiar keepsake, grounding yourself gently. Sleep becomes lighter with age for many. You wake at subtle sounds that once would not have stirred you. The wind against shutters feels sharper. A child's cough across the room draws your attention immediately. Yet there is also a deeper patience now, a willingness to let small discomforts pass without agitation. Scholars continue to discuss whether 19th century elders felt greater integration within family life compared to later periods. Living alongside children and grandchildren ensured daily interaction, though it also limited solitude. As you listen to a grandchild's soft breathing nearby, you feel how continuity replaces isolation. Your body requires different preparation for bed than it once did. A moment longer seated before standing, a hand pressed briefly against the wall for balance, These gestures become routine, neither dramatic nor embarrassing, simply part of living. Outside, the night remains much as it always has. Stars wheel slowly overhead. The faint scent of earth drifts through the window if it is left open slightly. Time moves steadily whether you observe it or not. You reflect on how the century at Sikh has aged with Hanoyu. From candlelight to electric bulbs, from rope beds to spring mattresses, from frontier cabins to growing cities. Yet within your own experience, what stands out most are the shared breaths in darkness and the quiet constancy of returning to bed each evening. As sleep approaches, it feels softer, less urgent. There is no race to conquer tomorrow. Instead, there is gentle acceptance. The room around you holds layers of memory within its walls. And as you drift toward rest once more, you sense that night has always been both refuge and mirror. It reveals what endures across decades. The steady presence of family, the rhythm of breath, the simple necessity of lying down and trusting that morning will rise again. By the time the century leans toward its close, your room feels both familiar and quietly transformed. The timber beams may be older now, smoothed by years of smoke and touch, yet beneath them lie small signs of change that would have astonished your grandparents. A modest iron bedstead stands where rope once sagged. A kerosene lamp, or perhaps even a single electric bulb, rests ready on a bedside table. Water waits inside the house instead of in a bucket beyond the door. A firmly established historical understanding tells us that by the turn of the 20th century, many American households had experienced at least some degree of modernization, though unevenly distributed across region and class. Progress arrived in layers. Some families embraced it swiftly, others held fast to older habits. You find yourself somewhere in between, grateful for improvement, yet attached to ritual. You sit on the edge of the bed and listen to the quiet. It is not the same silence you knew in youth. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle might cut briefly through the dark. A street lamp glows faintly beyond the window if you live in town. Yet within these walls, night still gathers gently around you. Researchers continue to explore how domestic modernization influenced emotional life. Did brighter rooms and private bedrooms diminish the intimacy forged by shared quarters, or did they grant individuals restorative solitude previously unknown? As you glance toward a door that now closes fully between spaces, you sense both comfort and a trace of nostalgia. An intriguing detail from turn-of-the-century household guides reveals growing emphasis on bedroom decoration as an expression of personality. Floral wallpaper, framed photographs placed carefully near the bed. The sleeping space becomes not only practical but reflective. You run your fingers lightly over a small photograph resting in its frame, recognizing faces preserved in silvered memory. A widely acknowledged fact confirms that improved sanitation and public health measures gradually reduce certain disease rates by the century's end. Cleaner water, better waste management, and advancing medical knowledge subtly reshaped nightly anxiety. You may no longer fear cholera in the same way earlier generations did, though. Uncertainty never disappears entirely. Historians still debate whether these changes marked a clear break from the past or a continuation of older patterns under new materials. As you settle beneath your quilt, you realize that even with electric light and factory-woven sheets, the essential vulnerability of sleep remains unchanged. You still close your eyes, uncertain of tomorrow's exact shape. The mattress beneath you feels firmer and more forgiving than straw once did. The quilt carries patterns more intricate than homespun squares of youth. The window closes more tightly against wind. These are quiet triumphs of a century's labour and innovation. Yet you remember the nights when wind slipped through cracks in fresh-cut logs, when embers required careful coaxing to survive until dawn. You remember shared rooms filled with whispered stories, the closeness of siblings breathing in unison, the steady vigilance during storms. Now, as you lie in a slightly modernised home at century's end, you feel both distance and continuity. The room is calmer, more insulated from external threat. The light switch at your fingertips offers immediate control over brightness. The clock on your table measures time with steady assurance. Scholars continue to reflect on how these material shifts laid the groundwork for the dramatic transformations of the 20th century. Yet within this moment, you are simply a person preparing for rest, as countless others have done across decades before you. The house exhales softly around you. The last faint glow from a distant street lamp filters through curtains. You turn onto your side, drawing the quilt close. You consider how ordinary families throughout 19th century America navigated nights shaped by frontier hardship, industrial hum, communal closeness, and gradual innovation. Their experiences differed widely across region, race, and class, yet each evening ended in a similar gesture. They lay down. They trusted walls and warmth. They surrendered briefly to darkness. And now, at the edge of a new century, you do the same. The room is steady. Breath slows naturally. Outside, the world continues its quiet turning. Inside, you rest within a space shaped by generations of adaptation and care. Sleep arrives not as conquest but as release. It carries with it echoes of log cabins, boarding houses, longhouses, and tenements. It hums faintly with the memory of rope beds and oil lamps. Your eyes close gently, the century fades into dream. The pace of thought softens now. Words grow quieter. The room grows still. You feel the mattress supporting you, the quilt warming you, the steady rhythm of your own breathing anchoring you. Outside, distant sounds blur into nothing. Inside, warmth remains constant. There is no need to plan tomorrow in this moment. No need to account for storms or schedules. Just the simple permission to rest. You drift deeper, carried by the same ancient rhythm that guided families through cold winters and humid summers, through hardship and hope. And as night folds fully around you, you sense that beyond timber and brick, beyond lamps and springs, what truly sustained ordinary lives across the 19th century was this quiet act of lying down together, trusting the dark and waking again when morning light returned. Sweet dreams.